Everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'd like to welcome you all, first of all, to the 7th Cycle Bootcamp. It's a pleasure to have you guys all again with us, and hopefully we'll have many more as well. I'll give you a quick overview of labs. We've got over 300 portfolio companies across the region. And in Bahrain, so far, we're at 44 to date. We've received over 30,000 applications, and we have a total of 700 mentors and coaches throughout the regional network. So far, our startups have raised $55 million in follow-on funding, and we've got over 100 corporate partners, a little bit outdated as well, around 200 corporate partners across the region, and we've 1,000 jobs through our startup. So one thing that I want everybody to be aware of is that if you get through our program and you'll end up basically having access to offices throughout the region. So if you're with Bahrain, you'll also be able to access our offices in Cairo, Abu Dhabi, Tunis, Amman, Beirut, and we're going to be launching in Riyadh as well, probably towards the end of this year in Q4. And that you'll also have access to the team on the ground over there. So if you're looking to do business development or scale, we'll have experts in each of these locations who can help speed things up and get the right introductions done for you. Some of our corporate partners, especially in Bahrain, they include Gulf Air, Zain, the likes of BBK, MBB, and we work closely with them to have partnerships with for our startups. For example, with Zain, we've had a lot of our B2C startups end up doing promotional campaigns with them where they offer a value-added service to their consumers, but at the same time, they get mass exposure amongst the Zain clientele. So applications for Bahrain, we've received over 1,500 to date from over 55 different nationalities across 50 different countries. And our mentors, we have a very large network of mentors in the country. I'm not going to go through them. This is just a general overview of the ones we have from Bahrain. But when you go onto our website, you'll actually have access to all the regional mentors as well. And later on, we'll be asking you to go through them to pick your mentors for those that get selected in the accelerator program. So just a quick overview. We've got from the past 6 cycles, we have portfolio startups that they go across all verticals, and they will be stepping in here and there in the program. I think you'll even meet one of them during the bootcamp, and also during our actual acceleration program, they get involved as well, and we try and create synergies between past founders and our current founders. So just to give you an idea of where you're at now, we had the applications. We reached around 290 applications for this cycle. And then we've done around 70 interviews. And out of that, we've shortlisted you guys. And so now you're in the boot camp, which is going to last 5 days. I think all of you should have already received the full schedule of the boot camp. If you haven't received the schedule, please contact either Anita or Sarah Al-Hawaj. They're our office manager and our program officer. So the selection committee, and we've changed the format a little bit because we want to give you guys more time to prep. So the boot camp's going to last about 4 days from today. And then you're going to have time off in between that. And then on the 12th, we'll have the actual selection committee where you'll be pitching your startup. It'll be sort of like a Dragon's Den Shark Tank scenario. And it's going to be in a private format, so nobody else will be able to access the Zoom channel at that time. So just to go over the offerings, we've got $32,000 in seed investment in exchange for 5 to 10% equity. The capital will stay the same. The only thing that might change is the equity, and that depends on where you guys are at. You know, if you're post MVP, pre MVP, if you're revenue generating or non-revenue generation, if you have traction or if you don't have traction. You'll also get access to the mentors, to the regional and international investors. We've got a very strong network of VCs. They also step into the program here and there, and they'll be doing office hours with all of you guys and consulting toward the end of the program. And naturally, the business training and coaching, which is the 3-month program. On top of that, we take care of the company setup and registration process with our legal team. We usually do a local incorporation, and then we'll do a Delaware incorporation when you begin to scale so that you can have access to international investors. You also get access to the regional network of Flat6 Labs offices and its partners, and our legal support, as well as the GAN network of perks, which is inclusive of, this is increased, it's now $25,000 of AWS credits, which most people end up availing from for hosting their platforms. So key dates. We're now in the bootcamp, and the selection committee, this is wrong, it's going to be on the 12th of April. And then we're going to start the actual cycle in May. And the demo day should be happening around September, probably mid-September. To date, our startups have raised over $2.5 million from the likes of OTF, Arzam Venture Capital, Faith Capital, Temu 500. And so as you can see from our portfolio, a lot of the VCs in the region, they're already very familiar with us. They've already invested in some of our startups so far. So the bootcamp's going to be a total of 5 days. We've got 19 teams with us for this bootcamp, and it will consist of 19 sessions. Dave will give you a better sort of brief overview of that later on. And the selection committee is going to basically be predefined slots. We'd advise everybody when we give you the time slot to try and be there 30 minutes early, so that you're prepped, and then it will consist of a 5-minute presentation plus 8 minutes for Q&A. And the selection committee will consist of 6 members. So there's going to be one person who will be representing Flat6 Labs headquarters, Central from Cairo. There'll be 2 people from Flat6 Labs Bahrain. I'll be one of them. The other one will be our chair lady, Sabah Al-Maid. And then we're going to have 1 representative from Tamkeen. And we're going to pick 2 external party members. We change these 2 every single selection committee, just to give us kind of another opinion outside of Flat6 Labs on the startups. And that pretty much brings it to a close. So good luck to all you guys. And Dave, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Ella. So good to be back. So I'll hit share screen here. So I've posted a link to the slides as well as the schedule and the agenda in WhatsApp. So feel free to connect there. And then we grab something here. Right. So as you have questions, feel free to send a chat, ask a question, put it in the WhatsApp channel. If I don't get back to you right away, it's because I've got a bunch of screens open. So I'll be looking for where that note was on the right screen. So, from a agenda today perspective, so this morning we'll be going over an introduction, talking about telling your story in 10 or 12 slides, which is your end game of the program, research and competitive analysis, markets, value propositions, customer development data, and then awkward co-founder discussions here at the end of the day. You'll see that we've got some time built in for breaks, for lunch, and an afternoon break as well. I would encourage you to be on video. It's definitely more engaging for me. Otherwise, I feel like I'm talking to nobody, which is always a bummer. But I'll try to make it as entertaining as possible for you as we go. I am recording the sessions both before and after lunch. So those recordings will be available after they process when we're done with the calls today and tomorrow. We'll also record the feedback session on your pitches. So you'll have those available for feedback. Sometimes it's hard to take good detailed notes on the feedback that you get. So we want to make sure that you have a chance to have that recorded as well. So those will be posted on the website after each session on the day. So that's a little bit on the mechanics. You'll also notice there's a number of tabs at the bottom of the schedule on the Google Sheet. The first tab is the final schedule. Second tab is the list of the deliverables. So I would encourage you to make a copy of that. And as you fill it in, don't fill in that main sheet. That's kind of the first epic fail as far as taking directions. So make a copy of it and fill in your own deliverables. Am I checking your deliverables? No. So is somebody checking your deliverables? It's your business. This is not homework. So it's up to you to get those things done, but they're done with the intent to help you actually hit the deliverables. And you'll notice every section of the programming we cover over the next 3 days really will fill in each of the slides that you're going to use on your slide deck for your final presentation. One of the questions I get all the time is, hey, well, do I have to follow the slides? Do I have to follow the order of the slides? Can I do my own? You know, ultimately it's your business. You can probably do what you want, but I know what Sala would tell you in advance, which is the teams are going to see on the selection committee, that group of people is going to see 19 pitches in one day. So I would encourage you to follow the format and make it easier on the team to not ask questions about what your deck is going and have them ask questions about the business. So I would encourage you to follow the format as we go. You know, we'll talk more about the slides as we get there as well. So that's the schedule for today. All right. From a presentation perspective, the presentations are on dkparker.com and again in the WhatsApp channel, as well as the Venture Ready scale. And there's a blog post and a scorecard that's on a Google form. So please do fill that out as well. It's really a chance for you to score yourself and to understand what areas you're weak in. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the program as well. All right, so let's get rolling. So first about me, I am in Seattle, Washington. As I was telling a few folks as you all joined in, it's what time is it here? 11 o'clock, a little past 11 o'clock on Saturday night. So the plus side is I get to sleep on my own pillow. The bad side is I don't get to be with you guys, which would be much more fun. And looking forward to this being over, the pandemic wise, so we can actually get a chance to connect in person again. I think Sala, this is my 4th or 5th time doing this, something like that.
Yeah. I think we were the first boot camp that went virtual, so we did it in cycle 5, 6, 7 now. So
yep. So and twice there in person. So I do miss getting to be there with you in person. So look forward to that time again, and maybe in September I'll be able to maybe we won't have a virtual boot camp in September. Who knows? So I've had a chance to work with pretty much all of the boot camps now. For Flat6 and the Flat6 team out of Cairo for a number of years. So for me, a 5-time founder, sold 3 of those companies, closed 2. I've raised $12 million in venture capital, exited 85. So never a unicorn, you know, but not so bad either. So if you're familiar with Startup Week and Startup Weekend, I used to run those programs globally. So my last full year with Startup Weekend, we did 1,265 events worldwide with about 74,000 attendees in 120 countries. And we sold that company to Techstars in 2015. So I've done 11 transactions total, both as a founder, operator, board member, and advisor. So 9 on the sell side and 2 on the buy side. And I have a book coming out. That the sign you see over my shoulder is from my publisher. They actually sent me a big printout version. I have a book coming out called Trajectory Startup, Ideation to Product Market Fit. A lot of that content we'll cover in the next few days. So, so I've done worked for a number of venture capital firms. I generally think of myself as a founder first and an occasional investor. So look forward to hearing your all's pitches and getting feedback in the ideas, as well as watching you on your own entrepreneur journey. So rules of the road. So ask questions as we go. We don't wait till the end of the day. Just feel free. I'm easy to interrupt, I hope. So I'll try to answer them with questions that are relevant to everybody, not specific to you. If it's a questions that's too specific to you, I may table it until we come back from a break. So the idea here is I want to be able to be helpful for everybody, not just specific and auger in on your one specific idea. I will interrupt Please don't take offense. But if you ramble off on your idea and we're going the wrong direction, I'll interrupt and just expect that to be part of the process. As you guys know from being on Zoom for the last year, these are a little challenging. So I want to make it as easy as possible for you to stay engaged and be engaged. And we've hopefully put enough breaks in there to make that a little bit easier. I will come back from the breaks early as well, just so everybody has a chance to get connected and learn a little bit. Even in a virtual format, I would encourage the fact that you have a chance to connect with other people. Though everybody's working on different ideas, you're all at a similar stage, which is how do you hire people in this challenging market? How do you raise money in a market like Bahrain? So be aware that the idea of networking and following and getting the chance to connect with folks is super important. Along that line, you'll find folks on this call who are great technical, great in go-to-market, great in PR, great in product, and you're not great in all those things. So find somebody on the call here that as you get to know them, there'll be folks in your startup journey that you get to connect with for a number of years. So when I started my first company in '98 in Seattle, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates weren't really participating in the startup community. So we had to kind of form our own community, and you guys are kind of in the same spot. And this is very much the start of that for you. So find a chance to connect. Okay, so those are some rules of the road. So we're going to start off. This is your scorecard. I would encourage you to fill it out online as well, but I'm going to walk you through it now so you can get a chance to understand what the questions are. So first off, this is a scorecard that we did for a venture capital fund that I was part of. Part of what our goal and objective was to create a score and a feedback mechanism that we could give founders feedback, because venture capital is kind of notorious for not giving feedback on your pitch. They'll be like, when you find traction, let me know. Well, we should talk again. And you can walk away from those meetings feeling like, oh, that was a great meeting, when the fact is it wasn't that great of a meeting. So how do you do that? So our approach was to really do what we called our fast 4 and our slow 6 as it related to the 10 characteristics that we wanted feedback from founders. Just changing the screen here. So let me walk you through what the 10 factors are. And I would encourage you to score yourself as we go through this, and then go back and fill in the form online. So first off, on team, are you a solo founder, or do you have a well-balanced team? So for example, a lot of teams have 2 people who have similar skill sets. That would not be necessarily a well-balanced team. It would be, we have a team, but we don't have enough people on the team to cover all of the bases and things that we need. So somebody who's a product person or a technologist, somebody who's a hustler and can go out and sell and go out and raise capital, somebody who's good at go-to-market. So on that scale, do you have product knowledge or vertical market and industry knowledge? Could be that if you're a solo founder, you're probably going to score yourself a 2 on this one, even though you're awesome. I know that, right? But the challenge is we're really after the team question. So a 4 in this category, and by the way, scorecards are all 1 to 4 versus 1 to 5. And the reason for that's pretty simple. What we found in venture is that we would be like, well, I like the team, but I don't like their idea, so I'll give them a 3. So we eliminated that. And a 1 is, yeah, it's a 1. A 4 is, wow, it's amazing and I love it. 3 is, I like it. 2 is, I don't like it. And 1 is like, nah, definitely not. So I'm gonna have you do math in your head here, by the way. So feel free to jot it down, and it would have you total it up at the end. So on the team, how would you score yourself? Solo founder, 2. Now we've got a team, but we're not strong in technology yet. Okay, maybe a 3. Our team's rock stars and we've known each other for 10 years. Great, you're a 4, right? But go ahead and score yourself on that schedule. The second one is idea. So is it a big idea? Is it really a problem? Or is it something that I'd like to be a problem? So if you're B2C, the question might be, is it fun? So if you're doing something in the gaming category, the answer to that could be like, it's super fun and the product is super sticky. But what I'm after here is it a big idea? Does it change the world, or is it a niche idea? Is it a feature in somebody else's product? So if it's a feature in somebody else's product, but it's still a big market, that could be a 2 or 3, right? But if it's really a big idea, it could be a 4. What if you're a copycat of something that's already been fundraised against in the West? Great, could be a 3. You already have product market fit, and you have a roadmap that you can follow with other companies. So go ahead and score yourself on your idea. So on a 1 to 4 basis. So next topic is product. So do you have a product yet? Do you have an MVP? If you're still a concept, you're going to be a 1. If you're pre-product, but you have a product roadmap, and you have a product team, might be a 2. 3 could be MVP. I've got some traction, and the customers really dig it. Like it's super sticky. That might be a 4. So how would you score yourself on the product? Fourth one is market or customer. We're going to talk today about your total addressable market and your TAM and SAM and SOM and all those things. We're really going to focus on what your market size is. So versus the academic exercise of TAM and SAM. You need to know it because you'll get asked about it, but I really want you to focus on my first 10, 100, 1,000 customers, and we'll talk about that in your go-to-market strategy over the next couple of days. So, but is it a big and growing market, or is it a niche and small market? So if it's big and growing, give yourself a good score. If it's small and niche, give yourself a small score. If you don't know who your ideal customer profile is yet, your ICP, don't worry, we'll be talking about that in the next couple of days. But I really want to know, is it a market that's super exciting, or is it a market that people are like, meh? So is it just Bahrain? Is it GCC? Is it MENA? Is it global? So if it's something that's truly a global market, it's definitely a 4. If it's something that's just a regional market or a local market, it's probably a 2. So go ahead and score yourself on that. Next topic is competition. This one's a little harder to score because it's a little bit of a reverse, right, in some ways. But my question about competition is there a lot of competition that has already raised money in your market? So if you went to Crunchbase or similar, and you look at the vertical market, has there been 3 or 4 companies who've already raised more than $100 million in this category? If there is, you're probably a 1 or a 2. If you're following an international company who's already raised $20 million, that's not necessarily a bad thing because there's a playbook in place that you can follow, and that company has product market fit. It will probably take them 3 to 6 years to get to your market, at which point, if you have customer acquisition really nailed, right, they're just going to come along and say, we're going to make a build or buy decision. And if your economics are good, they may just buy you. So if it's that competition may be a 3 or a 4. So again, this one's a little tougher one to score, but in general, you get the idea. If there's no competition, I would definitely put you as a 1, because typically in the startup world, unless it's something that's completely innovative, there's always competition, at least in indirect. And there may be direct competition that's already raised money. And the question here is really one of, have they sucked the oxygen out of the room with the venture capital they've raised? So the last thing I want you to do in this exercise is to go in and pitch the committee and have them say, oh, well, you're like this and such company who's already raised $10 million in MENA, right? So I don't want that bright, light to be like, oh, we've never heard of them before. That would be bad. So we're going to walk through a competitive analysis and market research today and really go out and find who those companies are and who's raised money. So score yourself on that one. So traction is the next category. Traction is this funny word, and we'll talk more about it in the time that follows. But traction is typically a thing that you don't have yet that an investor wants you to have before they invest. And you'll usually get it almost as like a pat on the head, right? And people are like, oh, let it come back and see us when you have traction. So, but they won't necessarily what traction is. So is traction revenue? Is traction customer usage? Is traction customer growth? So I tend to think of it, if it's B2B, it's going to be revenue. And if it's business to consumer, it's going to be users. Could be time on site if it's B2C. And it could be revenues or proof of concepts if you're B2B. So go ahead and score yourself on traction. All right, timing. Why you and why now? So COVID has been interesting in that it's either created massive headwinds for companies or it's created massive tailwinds for companies. So what I want to know from a meta perspective is, as it relates to your idea, why is now a good time? So is it meta factors are in your favor? Is coming along, right? Tell me a story there that really says why now is a good time. And ultimately it's kind of why now together with the team. But timing is really the question there that I want you to score yourself on. Why do you think it's a good time for this? Or do you feel like we may be at the end of that time and it may not be a great time? So score yourself on that one on a 1 to 4 basis. All right. Next one is revenue models and finance, which comes down to how do you make money? So all the investors are going to want to know, how do you make money with this product? What type of revenue model are you going to be? For example, will you be a subscription model? Will you be are you a marketplace? Whichever model you're going to use, and we'll walk through the 14 revenue models in tech here tomorrow. So, and I'm going to ask you to choose your primary and secondary models, and combination models are fine. But what I'm after here is for you to recognize that different models have different economics. And those economics include really different multiples on what's called the enterprise value. So to give you an early example of that is if you're in the services business, which none of you probably are, you may have some services component, but a $1 million a year services business, if we were to go sell it as partners, would be worth roughly $1 million. $1 million a year in a subscription business is worth roughly $8 to $12 million. $1 million a year in a marketplace business is probably $3 to $5 million. So each of the revenue models has a different multiple on enterprise value. Yeah, Mohammed?
Are you talking about the multiples of revenues?
Yep.
Yeah. Will you share these with us again, or?
Oh yeah. I'm going to walk you through what the 14 revenue models are tomorrow and the difference in enterprise value in each one of them.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. I spend most of my time these days helping founders land the sale of their companies. So it's important to understand, like, if I have a choice between a transaction revenue model, where I'm charging transaction fees, or a subscription revenue model, I'm going to push you to subscription, because the difference in the enterprise value, or what the company will sell for, will be 2x over transactional revenue. But I'll walk you through all this stuff in detail over the next 3 days. This is a chance for you to score yourself up front. All right. So how do you make money? Do you have a financial model? We won't be doing financial models during this workshop. I will give you access to a folder of the 4 top templates you can use for a financial model. If you have your own financial model, use it, right? But there's nothing worse as a founder looking at a blank spreadsheet and trying to figure out how to do all the components of a revenue model. So the finance model is actually in a folder, and you can actually just go copy them. So when I give you access to it, please do just make your own copy. Don't just use the one that's there, because it'll look really goofy to everybody else that comes in after you. So, so revenue models and finance. So score yourself on that. If you haven't done if you don't know what your revenue model is yet, if you don't have a financial model done, no worries, we'll get to it. You're probably a 1. If you have a pretty good financial model already done, and you have a pretty good concept of how you're going to make money, could be a 3. If you have actual unit economic data, like what's your conversion rates and those sort of things, awesome, you're probably a 4. So score yourself on that one. One of the things investors will ask about is, what's your secret sauce? What's your intellectual property or your moat? Most of you don't have that at this point, and that's okay. What they want to know, however, is, do you have a path to get to a moat? Are you thinking about how you're going to be in a defensive mode? So typically in the early days, you have knowledge of the customer and speed. Those are your 2 fundamental drivers. But as you grow, right, what the question is do you have a way to build a defensibility to that moat? Okay. All right. Last one is a clear ask. So back when we used to do in-person meetings, hopefully we'll be doing them again soon. People would ask me for a meeting. I'm like, I know you have an agenda. Just tell me what it is. Because if I'm not the right person to meet with, I'll refer you to somebody else who is the right person to meet with. but I want to know that you have a clear ask. So if you're doing pitches, for example, public pitches or contest type pitches after you finish this program, your ask will always be for employees because you're always recruiting as a founder, right? You occasionally may be asking for money. So the question is, do you have a clear ask? Because getting into the program, ultimately this is a contest, as Salah mentioned. So getting into Flat6 Bahrain will be based on your ability to pitch your idea and make a clear ask. One of the asks that will be on your slide is, why Flat6? Why do you want to come to this program? And it's not just, oh, we get $35,000. We know that. Everybody gets $35,000. So the question is, do you need access to mentors? Do you want access to customers? Do you need to be part of their network? So just, I want you to have a clear ask of what it is you need. So score yourself on that one. Okay, quick math test. What'd you score? It's on a basis of 40. Go ahead, shout them out. Or drop them into the chat window.
$24.
24, okay. 32, okay. All right, 23, 30, 26. I love it. You got your brand in there for Skoola. All right, 24. Great. So hopefully this gives you an idea. So each of these will represent one of the slides you're going to pitch at the end of the week. We'll go through the content, how you find this information. For example, how big your market is. We'll go through that content today. But basically what we're working on is we're going to build out your slide deck with real data. So the pace of the next 3 days is going to be challenging. So the amount of work you'll need to get done with your co-founders in the evening, at the breaks, at lunchtime, is important because it ultimately gets onto your slide deck for the end of the week. So just know that that's the work that needs to get done. Some of these tasks require more work than other tasks. Like would the team like you to have a financial model and a 5-year projection built? That would be great. Or do I have time to have you do that in the 3 days and 4 days I have with you? No way, right? So I would encourage you to use your time wisely based on where your score is lowest. So if you have something you're a 2 in, we need to get an answer to that question so that you can get that 2 up to a 3, right? Some of you have scored yourself higher than you probably deserve, which is okay too, because as founders, that's what we do, right? The math here is that it's the thing I love about what I get to do. If you walk into a room of 100 founders, or how many do we have today? So from a group perspective, we have 42. So if I walk into a room of 100 founders, everyone knows that 75 to 90% of the startups fail, and everyone knows the math doesn't apply to them, right? That's what I love about it. It's us, right? It's my tribe, right? Every idea is slightly delusional right before it works. So the way I'm going to push you over the next 4 days is you're the first investor in your business. What I want to encourage you to think about is I want to give you a framework for how to think about your idea, give you a way to know how you're going to make money, because one of the questions that the selection team is going to ask you at the end of the week is, how are you going to make money? Is it a small amount of money? Is it a big amount of money? For founders, we think about how we get money into the company. For investors, they think about how they get money out of the company. So I want you to think about it from an investor perspective, because you're the first investor in your company, and spend time on the stuff that's most important for you to spend time on. So knowing where your weaknesses are important. So you'll get feedback from me. Sometimes it will sound a little tough. It's not because I don't believe in you. It's because I want you to focus on the things that are the greatest challenge for your company to answer. And sometimes as founders, the challenge we have is we're just a little bit delusional, right? And that's okay. So like I said, it's the thing that makes us do what we do. And it's also the things that push us to go create, 3% of the world are entrepreneurs that generate 66% of the jobs. So my question is let's make sure we're working on the right things, right? All right. So when I was with the fund, one of the things we tried to do is to come back and say to the teams, here's our criteria for the fast no or a slow yes. So a fast no for us is if we don't like the market, if we don't like the team, if we don't like the product, and if you don't have any traction, then it's probably a fast no. So we would have teams answer those first 4 questions first. If we liked them with those first 4 questions, we'd have them come in and pitch the partnership and answer the other 6. Because what we decided as a team was we don't really, your intellectual property and IP and moat doesn't really matter if we don't think the market's very big, right? If you're a solo founder, for the venture team that I worked on in that company, we only invested in teams. So I don't know if there's any solo founders here or not, but for us, a team was a critical component of it because we knew we were going to see you in person once a quarter at a board meeting. I'd talk to you maybe once every other week and maybe have a lunch or coffee with you once a month. But I wasn't going to be the person to really challenge your ideas and really help you hone your focus, right? And if you tend towards a visionary person, you always have lots of ideas, right? The answer is keeping you focused, and defining what you say no to is super critical. If you're the person on the team who's an integrator and you're really good at the details, you'll know that the visionary throws you off, right? Because they can whipsaw the team as well. I tend to be that person, right? So if things are going too good, I tend to disrupt things, not intentionally, but I'm always coming up with new ideas. So my first company, we did electronic license delivery of software. We started the company in 98. I sold it in 2002. So we grew that company from 0 to 32 million in sales in 4 years, and from 3 co-founders to 155 people in 4 years. So then we survived the tech bubble and 9/11. So we sold it in 2002, which if you remember back, if you were in the startup world then, it wasn't a great time to sell a company, but we got the company sold. The challenge was we were competing in a market that the company who ended up buying us did $1.2 billion, and my 2 largest competitors did $12 billion and $15 billion respectively. So we were competing in a land of giants. So 32 million, 0 to 32 is a big number, like it's a super fast growth. The challenge was in a market of $1 billion companies, you're still a super small company. So for us, we had traction, we had a good team. Ultimately, we didn't have a great market, right? Because the margins were super small. So it was hard to make money in it. But of the 4, we scored really well on 3 of the 4. So the reason I bring this up is each venture capital team you talk to and each angel investor you talk to may not have a criteria that's a checklist like I just presented to you, but they all have a checklist in their mind. And if you don't answer the questions, like just checking the boxes as we go, then you're going to get a qualified, let us know, stay in touch. Like when you have traction, let us know, right? Those meetings are generally not a good outcome, right? What you're after is finding an investor who's like really believes in what you're doing and is willing to provide advice and to check. So that's the approach that you'll get feedback on from me over the next few days. Addressing the weaknesses. So now you have some of the scores of where you're weak. And in the next 3 days, we're going to talk about how do you really shore up those questions and make sure people make sure you get answers to those questions. Okay. Yeah, don't ignore the elephant in the room because the investors won't, right? So if you're like, oh, I don't have the technical co-founder. Yeah, that's question number 1. Or, well, we don't have a product yet. We have kind of a concept. Okay. So one of the things I appreciate about Flat6 teams doing this and with a number of teams that are on, when you're at 29 teams, it can be challenging because we're going to have you all start to do Mad Libs pitches, which is the short elevator pitch today. And then starting tomorrow and then the next day and the next day, we'll get a chance to listen to all of your pitches, which can be at times really, a lot of different pitches and a lot of work. But one of the things I appreciate about Flat6 is if you don't make it in this program, they're giving you training to get you into the next program. So just know that that's, part of this process is I'll come back and see folks that I saw 2 cohorts ago that get into the next program as well. So don't have it be a discouragement, have it be a not yet from a timing perspective. Okay. So we'll make sure we take those on head on and don't ignore the elephant in the room. All right. So business models are made up of 3 big buckets, and I want to break them down for you because we're going to talk about each of them as we go through it in this next few days. So the first thing is how do you create value? So the creating the value for you is your product or your service. So it's also your team and your market. So if you're building a product, that's the value you're creating is what's to that particular market with the team that you have today. So that's bucket number 1. And this really sorts down together as a Venn diagram. So the second piece is how do you capture value, which is the outcome. It's the reasonable to exceptional profit. So if you're doing a recurring revenue software company, a SaaS business, subscription business, you may have 80% to 90% gross margins. So investors get excited about those businesses because they're recurring revenue and because they have high gross margins. If you're in an Internet of Things business and you're using hardware and software, your margins are going to be lower because you have lower margins on the hardware component. If you're doing the services business, because people are involved, scaling the business can be a problem because every time I get a new customer, I have to add people, right? Or I may have to get 3 new customers to afford to add another person. So the capturing value is really how much margin is left. And then the big variables that we're going to cover in the next few days is how do I deliver value? And the delivery of value really comes down to what's my pricing, what's my revenue model or my economics, and what's my sales and marketing. So we're going to break these down into components because you can't really do a financial model unless you have a set of assumptions about how you're going to spend money on marketing, what sales model you're going to use. For most of you, the answer is it's super early. We don't have a product yet. We don't have any customers yet. No problem. I still want you to have a hypothesis that gets you to the back of the napkin math. It's because if the back of the napkin math doesn't work, the complex spreadsheet won't work either. So just know that that's the things we're going to be breaking down over the next few days. So if you think about it together, if you created great value and the product's super sticky, if you've nailed the pricing in your revenue model, you'll have a good outcome of positive cash flow. If you don't have your economics figured out, then you won't have a number that people will be like, yeah, that sounds about right. It's about the right percentage of gross margin. Every one of the 14 revenue models has some heuristics, some rules of thumb, if you will, around what are the acceptable numbers. So for example, conversion ratios or lifetime value to CAC ratios. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow with your go-to-market strategy. But I want you to have a hypothesis on what your economics are. So one of the companies I was fortunate enough to sell was we were building a product for small and medium businesses that allowed them to automate their donation request process. So it's kind of like LinkedIn for donation requests. So a small business, somebody would come in and say, hey, our kids are doing this thing for their school auction. Can you guys donate a $50, $100, whatever gift card? So I had a friend who was running a small business at the time. She had 6 locations. She had literally 1 request per day per store. And they had 1 person who just managed those requests. Because if they didn't manage the request, people would be offended. They didn't get back to them. So my question was, well, how do you manage it? Because this is something software could definitely solve, right? And so we ended up building the product. But one of the things I discovered about it was, even though we built a product that automated the donation request process, the economics and the cost of selling it was super high because we built a product nobody knew was available. So our marketing had to be outbound marketing and outbound sales because no one was searching for donation automation software on Google. There was no traffic. I couldn't buy web search, right? Because we were building a product no one had ever built before. So the point of it is, could I build it? Yes, totally. We did build it. Could I sell it at reasonable economics and make money? That's a great question. So you may still have that question for your product, and we just want to nail it down in the next few days. If we nail it down in the next few days and you don't get into the program, I would encourage you to pivot to a different problem or a different market. And we'll talk about pivots in day 3. So, because if you don't get into the program, it's not an ultimate judgment on will your idea succeed or fail. So you shouldn't take it that way, but it is a judgment on, can you explain it adequately so that people understand what it is you're doing? Okay. So what happens if your Ven's out of diagram? If you don't figure it out, then the margins are going to be off, or your go-to-market strategy is going to be wrong. So if you don't know marketing and go-to-market, no worries. I'll walk you through the dark arts of those things as we get into day 2 and day 3. But know that what I'm after here is that you've figured out some of the basic numbers and assumptions, and you have a reasonable story to tell that really helps you tell that story. Okay. Questions about business models before we move on? All right. So feel free to drop it in the chat window as we go, or in WhatsApp, either way. So there's a concept here of 2 epochs. And basically, there's two periods of your startup's life. The first one is, if you think about it as BC and AD, or if you think about pre-internet and post-internet, pre-Game of Thrones and after Game of Thrones, another set of epochs, and then pre-product market fit and post-product market fit. So your first sprint is really to get to product market fit. And the big question for you is, where are you on that continuum? And we'll talk about and define what product market fit is as we get into that in the next couple of days. But the concept here I want to stress to you is there's a bunch of stuff you don't need to address now. Like, do I need to get the culture of my company right? Right? My friends who do company culture stuff will find this to be completely heretical, right? Which is, no, you don't need to get company culture right. Now, if you're a jerk, it helps to get it right because it'll make it easier. But the fact is that you need to get a product market fit, or you don't have a company. You know, do you need to know how to run a board meeting? Should you sit in on my seminar on how to run a board meeting? Running a board meeting is great if you have product market fit. But if you don't have product market fit, running a board meeting is not really important. It's like buying office products, right? You don't really need to know what color your folders are for your file folders. So everything for you is a sprint to product market fit. And I hope to help you get focused on that, because everything else you can fix later. So just know that there's things required to get you to PMF, and then there's everything else. So that's my agenda for you as we go. All right, I'm gonna hit escape here so I can get rid of that red line. Somebody's being artistic on me. Okay. I guess maybe me who did it. We'll see. All right, so let's go to why startups fail. So this is the CB Insights data. CB Insights started doing this about 4 or 5 years ago. There's a number of different resources for it. They do this on a quarterly basis. If you don't subscribe to CB Insights newsletter, I would encourage you to do so. What CB Insights is really done in this category is they look at, why do startups fail from a big, broad picture perspective. You'll notice the number one reason is no market need. So let me break down no market need for you. So number one is you built a product that nobody wants, or if it's B2C, it's not fun or engaging. So defining what nobody wants means nobody will pay for it. So just know that if you don't have a path to economics, as cool as your product may be, right? If you can't make money at it, there's no market need. So something that's useful, solves a real problem. If it's B2C or gaming, for example, it's got to be fun. And it's very much a hit-driven business. And customers have shown they're willing to pay for it. So that's the number one reason startups fail. Number two is really ran out of cash. Probably relates back to number one. Number three is not the right team. So one of the things I'll end this day with today that you have a deliverable for tomorrow is having an awkward co-founder discussion. So, and I'll give you a framework for doing that, and you have it as a deliverable for tomorrow, to go talk with your co-founder about equity splits and commitments and who's going to put money in and who's taking money out. So I will tell you, I did one startup of my 5 that was 50-50. There's only one, it was a mistake. I don't care if it's 50.1% and 49.9%. What I care about is somebody has to make a decision. So in stress testing the founders in a program like this is important, because if you don't finish the program, it's usually because the founders blew up. I've watched a number of programs I've been a Techstars mentor for probably 6 or 7 years. And whenever I see a team that just got thrown together for a program, I'm always like, I wonder if they'll finish the program or not. So it's just the math and observation. So just know that, not the right team. So we didn't have the right people. We didn't split the equity correctly. People had expectations. People didn't have enough personal runway, and they had to go back and take a job. So all legitimate questions we'll ask at the end of the day. We got outcompeted was the next one. Pricing or cost issues was the next one. Poor product. So wasn't sticky. People didn't enjoy it, didn't like it. We had a lack of a business model, poor marketing, ignoring customers. So you'll see the list goes down there. They update this list every quarter. The number one reason hasn't changed. So it's a lack of product market fit. Like, people have built a product no one wants. So just know that that's the number one reason. Now, for those of us as founders, I know that some of you see the future as if it exists today in real life, right? That's kind of the nature of what we do. So, but I want to give you context as we go through this, that today you're at the launch side of the company. And at the scale side of the company, you can be multiple things. You can have multiple revenue models. You can have customers, you have revenue, you have product teams, right? The question is, how long does it take you to get to scale? Can you do it in 3 months, 6 months, 6 years? If you're building an enterprise product, it's going to take you longer to build that product than it will take you to build a mobile app. So today you're at the launch phase of that chart. I want to help you get to the scale phase of it in the shortest possible time frame. If you do it in 3 years, it's super painful. If you do it in 6 months, it could be amazing. And a lot of this comes down to your customer development interviews, which we'll talk about at the end of the day today. So where you have opinions, it's important that you have data backed up by customer data. So those come from customer development interviews. But I want to encourage you to think about this as at the Uber at its launch was a marketplace that connected drivers in one city, New York. Their original pitch deck said that their entire, the TAM, the total addressable market, or the market size, was $4 billion and growing. That was their total market. So now at scale, they're huge, right? But at launch, you don't have everything you need. So you're underfunded, you're understaffed, right? You're under-resourced in everything. And it's important you prioritize things the right way. All right, so how do you judge a startup? So if you haven't seen Bill Gross's 7-minute video, Bill Gross started Idea Lab. He has a TED Talk out there. It's actually a link on the page. I would encourage you to when you click on it, it'll take you over to the 7-minute video. It's probably the best 7 minutes on startups on the web. And he walks you through what are the critical success factors of the startups and why were they successful. He looked at his own portfolio. So Idea Lab was the first accelerator. So if you've heard of Founder Institute, Adeo Resi actually worked with Bill Gross early days of Idea Lab. Adeo is a friend as well. So what Gross came back after looking at 200 companies and funded companies was the number one reason was timing, was market timing. So Uber and Airbnb were successful in part because of coming out of the Great Recession. People would look at it and go like having somebody stay at my house is kind of creepy, but I need the money for my mortgage. So their market timing was particularly good. Same with Uber. Coming out of this pandemic, we're going to see some similar things. So I commend all of you, because companies that got started during this pandemic are going to have a disproportionate likelihood of success, I believe, because they've survived so much to get to this point. So you still have to answer all of the other basic blocking and tackling questions, right? But know that the ability of founders to bounce back from this will create opportunities for you as well. So timing was the number one reason. Did we have good tailwinds? Was the timing right? Were people available? Was there cash available? There's a lot of investment money sitting on the sidelines right now. And there's a ton of merger and acquisition activity happening right now, which means there's a lot of cash just sitting there on the corporate side as well. So I think your timing is probably good, depending on your idea. The second topic was the team and execution. So you'll hear people say in venture and startups, the team or the idea doesn't matter, only execution matters. What's weird about that is it assumes that it's a good idea, right? So if you have a bad idea and you execute really well, you'll just fail fast. So my encouragement to you is kill bad ideas fast, don't fail fast. Failing is expensive. I've had one of those too, and it wasn't fun. So I actually closed 2 of the 5 that I started, and I sold 3 of them. So the idea, or how big the idea is, was number 3. Business model was number 4, and funding was actually last of the topics they looked at. So I'd encourage us to watch that video. It's a super interesting video, and Gross really nails the fact that even though he called his company Idea Lab, he's like, you'd think that I would think the idea was the number one thing. Actually, timing was the number one thing. Here's the hard thing about timing. So you only know it afterwards, right? So I hear VCs every once in a while say, oh, our timing was really great on that investment. Just quick heads up on that. The VCs didn't actually do anything. Like, you did the work, they happened to write a check. And revisionist history is part of the way they look at it. So it's me taking credit for the hard work that you did. I'm not good at timing. You're good at timing. So, but you want to make sure that timing's in your favor versus headwinds are in your favor. So one of the companies I'm on the board of, last year was our best year ever. Now, going into a year ago, wow, we were super anxious about that, right? Tightened up the team, stopped all of our hiring, made all the changes super fast, but we came out of last year with the best year we've ever had. Now, other companies are just gone. So timing is going to matter, and we just need to tell that story of why you and why now. So, so get some time to review that if you get a chance. Okay, so you'll hear it called in the startup world and in the VC world, you hear it called a surfing analogy on occasion. So the wave is the trend. So is it, machine learning or artificial intelligence? It tends to be is one of the big trends right now. Non-fungible tokens is a super interesting trend right now. So the question there is the timing of that wave. Is it something that's already crested and already happened, or is it something that's still out there? Some of you are genuinely visionaries and you see the future like it's going to exist, but you may have to train the market because being too early is super expensive, right? The market has to come along at the same time you do. So my first startup, even though we went from 0 to 32 million, we thought we would see the market grow from $1 billion to $3 billion. And the market just never really took off. So even though we were aggressively taking market share, it wasn't growing at the speed we thought it would grow. So just know that the wave is the timing of the market you're not in control of. The board is the product and the surfer is the team. So if I have those things lined up, I have a great team, right? In a great market, they're going to win. If I have a great team in a marginal market, they may still win, but it's not going to be a great win. But if I have a marginal team or an okay team in a really great market, they're likely to still win. So market always wins, right? So just know that even if you have a great team, if you pick a wrong market, the answer is it still won't be very exciting for the investors. So small waves are bad, right? Reflects bad timing. If you came out and said, hey, we're going to be a next Groupon competitor, I'd be like, ooh, that wave crashed a while ago. Like, that's not a great option. So just know that timing is as it relates to that. So the wave on the left is bring money. The wave on the right is meh. So I've been to some of your guys' beaches, and the answer is not big waves, right? So yeah, if you have a big wave, the answer is investors will dig it. All right, context-wise, one of the things I want you to think about is categorizing your solution. So investors tend to think about your product as, are you a service company or are you a product company? Are you selling business to business? Are you selling business to consumer? So as investors think about your product and your company, the thing I would encourage you to do is tell them where it fits into the matrix. So you could be like, oh, we're going to do B to B to C. Maybe you're probably going to start off with B to B first. And again, at the scale stage, you'll do both. But at your launch stage, are you focused on business to business? Are you focused on business to consumer? Are you selling a service like consulting? Or are you selling a product like Salesforce or Spotify if it's B2C? In the service side for B2C, it could be like a restaurant, right? So most of those smaller businesses tend to be geographically focused, right? And they don't expand very well past their particular market. So on this chart, pick where you are. Are you B2B? Are you B2C? You might be business to government. There's a few other that are that way. But generally speaking, it's either business to business or business to consumer. And are you a product or a service? Now, you can be both. You can have a percentage of your revenue be services revenue. Totally okay. But it should probably be 75% product and 25% services. So, but I want you to pick where you are on the chart. What you'll find from an investor perspective is investors tend to invest in things they know and where they've made money before. So as the last fund I worked for, we invested in business to business software companies, so B2B products on the West Coast. That was it. So the reason I bring it up is VCs have what's called a charter. So they go out and so if I'm raising money as a venture capital fund, I'm going to go out and talk with you all on my, to make you my limited partners. So there's 41 folks on the call. So let's say I have 41 limited partners. I've told you that I'm going to invest in MENA, in technology companies and business to business. If you bring me a medical device in MENA, am I going to invest? No, because I've told my limited partners, this is my investment thesis, and you should give me money to invest in that. So what if I found a B2B software company outside of the region? Will I invest in that? Probably not, right? Because I don't want to set myself up for a lawsuit. So one of the challenges you all have in the fundraising capacity in the market that you're in is that each of the countries tend to be very stovepiped, right? So I invest in Saudi, or I invest in Bahrain, or I maybe invest in GCC, right? But each fund that you talk to, you're going to have to ask the question of, do you invest outside of particular countries? Do you invest in GCC? Do you invest in MENA? Do you invest globally? Because you want to understand who their target investment profile is. So, and they tend not to invest in vertical markets where they've lost money before. Because the last thing I want to come to you all as my 41 investors and say, hey, I had this great investment. I know we lost $5 million on a similar investment 3 years ago. So typically VCs will not invest in areas where they've lost money before, but they will invest in areas where they've made money before. So rather than them figuring out, are you B2B or B2C or product or service, just tell them, right? So it'll be super helpful to help you narrow down your focus. And we'll talk about that specifically as it relates to finding new investors as we talk about investor profiles in day 3. Okay. All right. Problems and opportunities. So one of the things we'll talk about over the next few days is, as we listen to your pitches, is this a problem or not? And one of the first slides you're going to put together is your problem solution slide. It could be 2 slides, maybe 1. And the question is it really a problem? And you'll hear the analogy of a pain pill and a vitamin. So the concept here is it's something that customers look at and go like, oh my gosh, if you had that available today, I would pay for it. And I would be disappointed if I couldn't use it. Or is it something where you've manufactured the problem, which is kind of where it's a vitamin, where customers are like, yeah, it's okay, right? So are they motivated to use your product? Because the cost of switching is hard. The cost of changing workflows is hard. So is it something where it's really a problem that you're solving, or is it something that's kind of okay? What's the opportunity? Is it something where in the workflow, it's something that solves a big problem? So one of the challenges is if you're solving big problems, you'll find big money. If you're solving small problems, you won't find much money, right? So if it's something in my top few things, list of things I need to get done today, wow, it could be a big problem you're solving and could be worth lots of money. And who are you solving it for? So one of the things we'll talk about in your go-to-market on day 3 is really who your ideal customer profile is, your ICP, and how they make buying decisions. And one of the things I would encourage you to do as we go through this process is there's 2 approaches to it that you'll hear founders talk about. They'll either be vague and broad, kind of like, oh, everybody could use our product within the enterprise. That's just not the case, right? And you don't have enough sales bandwidth to go after that. Or you can go after like, oh, we're going to sell to the IT managers at mid-market companies and up in telecommunications and technology. Okay, wow, that's pretty narrow. And it may or may not be right. But I'd rather you lean towards the narrow focus and then pivot as you learn more than try to make it broad and everybody, right? So it could be you're selling to moms, could be you're selling to parents. That's great. I just want to narrow it down to how could I buy ads to that particular market on Instagram or Facebook, as an example, right? So I'd rather have you narrow it down first and then go test out your thesis and then grow it from there rather than try to make it too broad and too vague. And one of the things I'll try to push you on over the next few days is to move from vague concepts to really getting down to, at some point you have to put a number into a spreadsheet, right? So how many customers will we bring on this month? 2. Okay, great. How much revenue will that customer do? Which gets us down to the pricing discussion. So I'm going to push you in the direction of getting numbers that you can put into a spreadsheet. That means you can't be hand wavy about it. You have to actually narrow it down and say, like, I got to pick a number. And can you get paid for it? One of the big questions as we go here is how much cash will it take for you to get the product out before you can actually get to revenue? A couple of other quick side notes before we go into our break. There's a difference between products and companies. If you watch Shark Tank, you know that a bunch of the things that gets pitched there are products and innovations, right? Or just plain inventions, but they're not companies. Investors want to know that you're building a company, which includes a product roadmap. So it's not the first thing you're building or the first mobile app you're building, but it's actually the company you're building over time. So on day 3, before we go into final pitch prep, one of the things we'll be talking about is what's your product and company roadmap? What are your critical hires? When are you going to release new features? And what's your big picture vision? And I'm just trying to connect a couple of dots here for you to make it into a line, right? So you're going to have an MVP. It's typically not going to be great, right? Because it's a minimum viable product. Hopefully it's viable, but it's also not your scale product. But how long it takes you to get to scale is going to be important because it matters how much money you have to raise to get to scale. So day 3, we'll be talking about your company roadmap and your product roadmap. So if you haven't started to define that yet, and it'll show itself on your slide deck as a timeline. So we're going to get into the program. We're going to be in the program for 90 days. We're going to go to a demo day. What are we going to achieve while we're there? Here's why this is important. Investors invest in companies, not in products. And we tend to reinvest in CEOs and founders who have a track record of hitting milestones. So most of you don't have that track record yet, and that's totally okay. And some of you don't have a team yet to make that actually to try it out. But what I'm going to push you to think about is, okay, you're building a muscle here. We're training on something. We're going to get good at forecasting what we're going to get done this quarter and next quarter. And then we can get better at it the next quarter and better at it the next quarter. So all the companies that I've reinvested in were based on the teams and the CEO who actually hit the milestones they said they were going to hit. Were they always right spot on? No, but generally speaking, they were making that momentum. Versus one company that I was on the board of, invested in with a family office that I was with for about 3 years. The CEO went out and raised a bunch of money. I'm like, this is great. Congratulations. You still have to go get product market fit, right? And he's no longer CEO anymore because he was successful at raising money, but he wasn't successful at actually getting revenue and product. So that was it was a big component of it is you're going to have to go actually nail the milestones that you forecast. So know that that's going to be part of it. And it's what goes into your roadmap. All right, last couple of things. Should you build it? So this is Belty. This is an internet connected belt to a mobile app. So after you go out to dinner, you can actually use your mobile app to adjust your belt. Now, I have to caveat, they did pivot. They became a external battery source. But this is a great example of a product that made its way into TechCrunch that should never have been built. So if you're building a product and you're not sure, I hope we find out over the next 3 days that you're like, oh yeah, that product, I could build it. Should I build it? This is an example of one that should not be built. Here's another one. You guys remember this one? So the Juicero product. So these guys raised $125 million in Silicon Valley and burnt through it. And because they were selling juice packs that went into this juicing machine, and then people figured out they could actually just squeeze the juice pack, and they didn't need the machine to do it. So this is a classic Silicon Valley TV show blunder. $125 million. We could fund all of you guys for $125 million and then some. So should you build it? No, right? So that's one of the questions I want you to be able to answer for yourself as we go into the next part of the sessions. So last thing in one of your deliverables for today is I want to get together with your team and answer the question, if your startup was to fail, why would it fail? Is it going to be, we don't have, it's going to take too long to build the product? Is it we don't know the customer validation? Is it because we're building a product nobody wants? But one of your deliverables tonight with you and your co-founders is to do what's called a pre-mortem, and just to write up the, oh, if this was to fail, here's why it would fail. So for most startups, there's one thing you need to answer next, not 6. So in the customer development lifecycle, it could be that we need to go do 20 customer development interviews and find out if the customers actually care about this problem. It could be that we don't have enough data to feed the machine for machine learning. So the data sources aren't there. It could be the market's not ready for the product. So whatever it is, I would encourage you to identify it, and with your co-founders, figure out how you answer that question first. So if it's a lack of funding or the fact that there's not much funding for this type of product in the region, great, you know what the problem is, and now you can take on the task of going out and figuring out how to fix it. But with you and your co-founders, spend 10 minutes tonight and just write down your pre-mortem of, if it was to fail, why would it fail? All right. With that, we're going to open it up for some Q&A right now before we go into a 15-minute break and give you a chance to get some fill up on coffee and take a break. What questions do you have on our introduction before we move into your 10 or 12 slide scenario? You guys haven't got to know me yet. By the end of the session, you'll be like, oh, I got a question. All right. Go
Dave,
for it.
Dave, we have a solution that is tackling the jewelry business. I will not ask very specifically, but sometimes you sit with customers and they tell you this is not possible due to the nature of the industry. And we don't want to be turned off. We know this is possible. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, so one of the things you'll find, and we'll talk about customer development interviews later, Mohammed, as well, is sometimes based on how you ask it, customers will give you the response they think you want to hear, or they'll tell you what they know. So you'll hear founders use the Henry Ford analogy. So if I asked my customers what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse.
Yeah.
So I have to caveat that by saying, so my grandfather owned the first Ford garage in 1911 in southwestern Washington. Now he sold that too early, but he started the first phone company, and then he sold that too early. So consequently, I've sold every company I've worked for, right? So maybe too early, maybe not. Time will tell. But having more customer data will be super helpful. And what you're looking for in that is, especially in your case, as it relates to the gold and jewelry markets, is what's the hook that gets people to be interested in what you're doing that's different than the way they're doing it before. Almost all customers, both B2B and B2C, have existing workflows. And what most of you are trying to do is change some workflow. And if the change in workflow is so disruptive that they can't see it, sometimes you have to finish the MVP and actually just show it to them, right? Because it's super hard for them to kind of even understand, like, no, I've kind of always done it this way. It doesn't make any sense. But you're changing a workflow, and changing workflows are hard, right? So changing customers' behavior, you'll always hear, is a super hard thing to do. I'm sure we'll get into more specifics as we go.
Yep.
Questions from others?
Hello, Dave. My name is Mesa.
Hey, Mesa.
Hi. A quick question regarding this last slide. You did rightly say we have to ask ourselves this question and kind of address it as founders. But how do you think we should incorporate this in or should we present it? Or is this a thought that I should just keep and rank in my own mind with the founders?
This is the one. It's a great question, Mason. Thanks for asking it. This is the question that you need to think of yourself as, like, this is the elephant in the room. So when you finish the slide decks and when you guys are done pitching at the end of the week, the question I want the investors to be asking is, how do we get this team into the cohort? Not, I'm kind of skeptical about this thing, because they'll pick up on the same thing that you and the team pick up as, like, your highest and greatest risk. So every once in a while in this startup world, you hear it called a RAT, which is the riskiest assumption test. So what I want you to do is address it preemptively. So a good slide deck when you're pitching to an investor tends to be, when the investor asks a question, you're like, that's a great question. And you hit the arrow button or the space bar, and it goes to the next slide. What I want you to address in advance, Mesa, is, like, am I answering this for myself as the first investor? And do I know how I answer that question with the selection committee if they ask? What you don't want to be caught is, like, oh, no, that's not a problem. Like, finding a technical co-founder won't be a problem, right? Or pricing it 2 times above market won't be a problem, right? So you really have to look at it and go, like, one of the big questions that, and Mohammed's question is, I'm going to change customers' behavior. What's my cost of customer acquisition? Will customers pay for it, right? And if customers will, I want to show some data on it if I have the data. If I don't have data, I want to be able to make an assumption and have the investor come along with me and go, like, yeah, I kind of agree. The thing you don't want them to do is, like, what do you do again? Or, have you thought about the cost of customer acquisition here? So it's one of the things I would say, help you decide in advance, like, is this a great idea or not? Or is this going to be an uphill battle?
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else before we take a break?
Hi, Dave.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if I raise my hand or should I wait?
Go for it. I'm going to go with ladies. So everybody knows there's a disproportionate, so venture capital is weird, right? I'll give you the numbers for the math in the US. 3.2% of all venture capital in the US goes to guys named Dave. 2.9% goes to all women. Now, Daves are not the problem, right? Gyms get 3.4%, so they're worse than us. So I will disproportionately call on the ladies in this. And if you don't raise your hand, I will call on you, because I think you have a unique challenge doing a venture scale company anywhere and in MENA, right? So if I hear 2 voices, my experience is those of us as dudes will be like, we will talk off the top of our head without thinking about what we're saying. And the ladies will be like, I'll wait and ask my question later. So if I hear 2 voices and it's a male and female, the answer is it's always ladies first, just so you know.
I think there are 2 ladies now.
Go for it, Anna.
Okay, so my app is about mental health, because I'm an ABA therapist, applied behavior analyst. So mine is so different that it's actually most challenging compared to people products or anything, because still people stigmatize. The services that we provide for people, people still stigmatize mental health, even though people are aware of it and do agree to it. But that step is also, mine for me, I believe is more challenging, because we're trying to make those people out there to do taking that step to actually contact the practitioners, through the app. So it's more of actually not selling, like for me, it's more not selling the product, but kind of like selling of an awareness more, and making it that it's okay to ask for help when it comes to mental health. Whether it's mental health, whether it's getting a child, let's say getting your child diagnosed with autism, or getting an ABA therapy, or OT and speech. So it's quite hard in that kind of field, even though the fact that a lot of people know me as a ABA therapist, but still a lot of parents are still in denial, and it's still hard to do that one step.
For sure. So you've got a market development and timing issue, as well as a product issue, right? So the question is how do you?
So that's because you said product. So I'm wondering, what is my product? Because my product is actually not stuff, mine is actually it's service,
right.
Providing. And it's not just a service, it's actually, even people are aware of the service. Well, like it's
you're connecting them with therapists.
Yes. Okay. Yes, we are connecting to there where they can able to do their appointments and everything through app at this moment. But still, it is also trying to, my product would be more of, able, even though you have the service, but to do that, getting them motivated and reinforced, that's the word, reinforce them to actually go and do that connection and do your appointments, contacting people, contacting the practitioners.
Yeah, so let me break it down for you, because I think it'll make some sense. A little bit of a preview for tomorrow's session on how companies make money. So your product is going to be a marketplace, right? And the way you will monetize that marketplace is either a subscription or a transaction fee, because that's the way marketplaces are monetized. So you're connecting practitioners with parents or individuals, maybe paid through third parties and corporations, right? But we'll start off with the two sides of the marketplace before you go to a third side, because that adds a level of complexity that's super hard. So, but your product is what you're going to be developing, which is the product is the marketplace, either a mobile app or a web app that allows me as a parent to find the right counselor for my 13-year-old, right?
Well, that's what we have provided as well, so we have like ratings provided for therapists that they have to get 3-star rating and above. And if the practitioners have not gotten that 3 stars and they gotten below, we do give them an email of a warning that you need to get your services rating up, of your stars rating. But again, it's still a struggle. It can be sometimes if you understand. It's still a taboo for some places.
Oh, for sure. So I think there's a number of factors to consider here. One is the market timing ready for your product or not? Not can you build the product, but the product, and what we'll be talking about is here's the product roadmap, here's how the mechanics of the product work. The big picture question around if it was to fail says, are we too early to market or not? So one of the examples I'll use as we talk about market sizing is an app called Strava. So if you're not aware of Strava, it's basically I'm a cyclist now. So that's my my activity of choice. So when Strava launched, one of the things they did was it's a biking app that tracks your performance. So one of the things they launched with, Basma, was to launch with influencers who would talk about the product, right? And you're in a market that mental health is a challenge in every market, right? Some more than others. But the question is who do I go to and get a referral from if I have this challenge? Parents tend to talk to parents, right, of similar aged kids, right? So the question is how do that then becomes a marketing channel. And then the question you'll have to answer for the committee is, can I acquire customers at reasonable economics so that I can connect them with practitioners who will pay us enough of a transaction fee to make any money? So think of it as breaking it down into those pieces. Now, everybody who's considering a marketplace, because there'll be more than just you. The challenge with marketplaces is you have 2 funnels. I have a buy side funnel, right? Somebody who's buying your product. and I have a seller funnel because I have to get practitioners. And I have to track those two sides of the funnel differently, because if I don't track them differently, the numbers get super muddy, right? And it's hard to track. So the big picture question you'll have to answer is, the product looks like this, here's how the mechanics work. Like those questions are questions that you're answering now and you're doing. The big picture question is, does the investor and you believe that the market will get to a point where this is less of a stigma and the market timing will come towards you? Because if the market timing doesn't come towards you and it takes 5 years, you're gonna be one of those companies. You're like, yeah, we had this idea 5 years ago, but the market timing was just really rough. And I'm not saying that to discourage you. I just know that that's the questions the investors will be asking as well. Now, for everybody, you can overcome that by having customer data and customer acquisition data. And we'll talk more about that in the coming days. So I don't want to go too far off on just your specific one, but we can talk about it when we come back from the break as well. And we'll have time over the next few days to talk about how we systematically answer that question for investors, because if you're asking the question, the investors will be asking the question too.
Okay, so that means I have to actually, the question that I have to keep in my mind is, how am I going to market it and how am I going to present it? That's the question I'm putting in my mind.
And you have for both sides, right? How am I going to present it to the practitioners to get more practitioners on so I can get above 3 stars, right? And find the best practitioners. And how do I market it to acquire customers at reasonable economics and have money left over to pay for the product? So, and the great part is it's not just you, right? Everybody on the Zoom has the same question. Some of you have data, right, about that, which is awesome. Some of you have hypothesis. The way I'm going to push you is to get to a better hypothesis before you have to pitch to the selection committee. All right, I saw there was one more question before we take a break.
Yeah, that would be me, I think.
Go for it.
So I want to know what investors think about multi-product kind of startups, especially at early stage. Let's say we have multiple subscription plans, each with different economics or different pricing models. How would investors see that? Or what would their reaction be?
Yeah, we tend to want to focus first on which one is most likely for you to get the earliest traction. And in your case, in that specific example, is if you have multiple SKUs or multiple prices or multiple products, which one has the fastest sales cycle to close? So, and this same goes back to Bosman's question as well. So if of all the therapies people could buy, which one is the fastest one to go from introduction to actual transaction? So in your case, you could have multiple products and you could have multiple product lines. The question is which one will make you money so that you can invest in the ones that may be more profitable but take longer to sell, right? Okay. So one thing I think about it as an analogy is the example of a water line. There's things that are below the water line. They're big problems, but they're super hard to make money at. And then there's things that are above the water line, but they may not be as big of a problem, but at least you figure out, oh, if I make money here, I can reinvest to get to the things that are below the water line.
Okay. So priority goes to what makes money faster, not what gets more users faster.
It depends on the revenue model. Again, we'll break those down tomorrow. There's one of the other revenue models is called new media. So thing like WhatsApp, right? Yeah. Is a tool that works better with more users in your network. So the concept there is network effect, or what's called viral coefficient. Strangely enough, a year ago, I had to explain how viral coefficient works. And now these days I don't have to explain that, which is really sad. But going viral is probably the revenue model that really doesn't have a revenue model, because if you're acquiring customers so fast, then you don't have to worry about how you make money. For most of us mere mortals, we really have to worry about how we're going to make money, because that's always one of the things that's limited, which is access to cash for growth. So we'll talk more about those tomorrow as well. Okay. All right. So let's take 15 minutes now and go grab a coffee and refresh whatever you need to refresh. And we'll see you back in 15 minutes. And I'll hit pause on the record button. Resume. Okay. Other questions coming back from break before we move on to The 10 or 12 slides in market research and competitive analysis. Any other copycat companies out there that there's companies that have already raised money in the West with the same idea and you're pursuing? People are coming back, so I'm sure there are others. Yep. At least I can't hear you on audio.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
Ours is quite similar to, it's a peer-to-peer marketplace for pre-loved clothing in the GCC. So it's similar to Poshmark in the US or Depop in the UK or Vinted.
Yep.
So yeah, it's quite similar.
Yeah, and for both of your two examples, the real key questions will be when you can figure out their cost of customer acquisition, and we'll talk more about unit economics tomorrow. The big question there will be, are your unit economics more compelling than theirs? So one of the things that was interesting, part of the reason Facebook paid such a premium for Instagram was Facebook looked at their cost of customer acquisition and looked at Instagram's cost of customer acquisition and paid them a premium because the answer was they could acquire customers at a cheaper economic than Facebook could. So if you know your numbers well and somebody like Posh comes in, they're going to be like, this is a no-brainer, right? So because you're answering the same problem set. So, yep. Bernard? You're on mute. There you go.
Yes. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
First, thank you for the introduction. I have a quick question. So before the introduction, I have like 10, 15 questions for for the bootcamp. Now I have like 100.
Good. We're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and hopefully we can finish them in the bootcamp. During the off period, do we have access to people to anyone to ask questions about our needs? Like between 5 and 11, let's say, before the final pitch.
So yeah, you'll have a chance to do, we'll have pitch reviews starting day 2, so tomorrow afternoon, and then we'll do on the 3rd day and 4th day. The 4th day is mostly pitch reviews, but you'll have a chance to talk with Sala and the team from Flat6 as well. So since I'm not one of the judges, I provide my feedback to the team about your guys' pitch and the idea. And if you think about it, the Fast 4 feedback is very similar. Each of the judges they may not use the same 10 criteria that I typically use, but they definitely have criteria in their head, right? So you'll have a chance to ask Sala and the team questions over the next few days.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and again, feel free as my guess is if you have a question, somebody else has a similar question, so feel free as we go through this process to ask questions as we go. Thank you for letting me do it in English. My Arabic would be completely inadequate, even though I'm trying to learn as we go. And if I ever go too fast, feel free to slow me down. I won't be offended. I know that I love this topic and I love founders and it's what I do. And so I can be passionate about it and go fast sometimes. So so just slow me down as you go, and feel free to ask questions as we go. Also in the WhatsApp channel, if you have questions after hours, I would look to your peers to ask those questions of too. So don't think of me as the exclusive expert. That's not the case, especially as it relates to things like go-to-market. There's a lot more resources around this Zoom call than there is than just me. Okay. All right. So let's talk about 10 or 12 slides. So in order to do your pitch deck for the selection committee, there's typically 2 use cases of how you're going to use your slides as you look at your investor deck. So as people come back in, I'll keep hitting the emit button. So think of this as you have slides for on stage or a contrived event like the selection committee, where they've deliberately constrained you on the number of slides. So in your all's case, it's going to be basically 10. So we'll check with Sala on what the final slide count is, and I'll get those to you by the end of the day. But if you're on stage pitching or you're at a 500 startups event or something like that, any events like that are going to be a contrived set of slides. So you need to know where to put which slides you're going to do and which slides are going to be put off for later. If you're doing a VC pitch, it's typically around a conference room table, or it could be a Zoom call. And in that case, you're going to add a couple of additional slides as well, because that's really a conversation versus a, the pitch that you're going to do for the selection committee is I have to check all the boxes in the 5 minutes that I have, and then they have time to give you Q&A. So the important thing I want you to get through is I want them to ask the right question when you get done pitching, not the wrong questions. Like the wrong questions are like, okay, go to market and will customers pay for this? You have to have a hypothesis that you answer that in the pitch deck. So the question they're asking is, what do we need to do to get this team into the program? Not, I wonder if this will work or not. So if you don't answer the, I wonder if this will work, the pre-mortem question, like, is the market ready for your product or not? If you don't at least answer that with a reasonable hypothesis in the pitch, then the question they're going to be asking is, I don't know if this will work, right? Which means you won't get in. So I want you to be able to answer it with data from customer development interviews, but know that a conference room table, when we're sitting down with a VC, is you're going to give me some additional slides and we're going to have a discussion. And the slides are going to be your guide, again, to make sure you check all the boxes. But the discussion is going to be probably an hour. So I want you to be able to get through your pitch deck in 15 minutes and then spend 45 minutes on the questions that they have that are most relevant to the investment. So we were talking, coming back from the break, about copycat companies. So if you're doing something that's already been done in the West where money has been raised, the plus side is you can point to the other company as product market fit. So in essence, what you're doing is de-risking the concept because it's already been done somewhere else. And you have a playbook that you can follow because they've already done their go-to-market, they've already figured out their economics, and you can, anytime you can leverage that experience. Now the question is your market big enough for the investment, given that there's already a player who will be global, and will they come in and buy you? So versus, are you doing something that's truly a unique idea and has never been done before? So a lot of startup ideas are incremental. Some of them are truly visionary, and some of them are really big, right? So you just have to decide for you, is it a big enough idea for you to pursue and for investors to invest in? All right, you're always going to have supporting slides in your deck. So if the selection committee asks you questions about your market research or your competitive analysis, you'll also have those as supporting slides as backup, so that you can, if they ask you those questions, you can hit the next button and go show them that slide. So know that those questions are going to be questions that come after your final slide and are just there as supporting slides. So what are the questions? Here are your 12. And you'll see I've highlighted in red the ones that you'll leave off to get down to 10. So your first slide is going to be your title, your logo, and your tagline. So your tagline is going to be a variation on your value proposition, which we'll talk about this afternoon after lunch. Your value proposition is something you're going to test and iterate on a bunch between now and the time you get to the demo day. And it starts off a lot with what you think the value is to the customer, but the customer is the center of the story. And your tagline should make a statement that helps me understand if you're B2B, B2C, what you do. It can't be such a generic tagline that I'm like, I have no idea what you do. Now, this slide's going to be up longer than any other slide in your deck. So it should give me as an investor context to understand whether or not I'm going to listen to your pitch. So let's say, for example, the fund that I worked for and previously did B2B. If you're a B2C company, I'll listen to your pitch, but I'm not going to invest in it. So if it takes me to slide 4 to figure out that you're B2C and I was B2B, then I'm going to mentally check out. So your tagline should tell your viewer what it is you do. So we're a marketplace for pre-loved clothing. Great. I understand I can imply there that it's B2C and that you're reselling product. Great, right? But your taglines are hard because they're very few words, right? So we'll work on your value proposition this afternoon and then we'll push it into a tagline. It should also include your contact info and your website. right? So I should be able to see off that one slide, I should be able to find you and follow along. If we're doing it on Zoom and I'm multitasking, I'm going to go look at your website at the same time I'm listening to your pitch and see if things are consistent, right? So just give me enough information to follow up with you and know who you are. If you're doing a VC type pitch, then what you're going to do is you're going to give me an overview slide, a presentation overview. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover market size. We're going to cover blah, blah, blah. And then you're going to ask the question, is there anything else you want to cover? Right? And you'll take those in notes and you'll address them as you go. But the concept there is that if you have, if they have known questions in advance, you don't want to just rattle off your pitch. You actually want to give them, you want to get into a dialogue about why they think that's the most important question. 3 is your problem. So problem is, who's the problem for? What's the problem? What changes the customer going to experience? One of the things you can address here is what's your life like before your product and what's life like after your product. So, and does it really address a problem? 4 is your solution or your product. So what's your solution? What's the product look like? I want you to show the product if you have the product. If you only have wireframes, I would rather you show me wireframes than just talk about it. And again, coming back to the fact that this is a contest. Some of you have a concept and you don't have any product yet. Some of you have customers. If you have traction, I want you to get that part of the story up earlier in your process. So for example, you may say, hey, I've got to have, we already have 15 customers. We already have 150 customers. Just know that these are the more you can tell me as an investor that you already have traction earlier, I will listen to your pitch differently. Right? Versus I have some customers. So I was a journalist by background coming out of college. So in journalism, we call it don't bury the lead. So the lead of your story needs to be the top of your story. So if you have traction, tell me about the traction early. So next one is market size. How big is the market? How are you going to get to the market? Is it $1 billion market? Is it a $10 million market? So sorry, look at my note here. I was just looking at the note from Anita. So, all right. So, so how big is the market from that standpoint? You're going to do a competitive analysis. So your competitive analysis is going to be a slide that basically has, we'll talk about the chart of how we do it. We're going to go into research and competitive analysis next from a section perspective, but it's going to be a slide that basically outlines who your competitors are. If you have a competitor in a different market, that's going to be competitors in market and competitors out of market, or maybe an adjacent market, right? Or adjacent product. So again, the key here is I don't want you to ever be surprised and have somebody bring up a competitor that you didn't know about. So doing the work here to make sure you nail all the competitors is going to be super important. So traction and timing, and so that's the why you, why now question. Product roadmap we talked about briefly. We'll talk about that in day 3. And then tomorrow we'll talk about how do you make money and what your key metrics are. So number 9 is going to be your go-to-market strategy. We'll dig into that a lot tomorrow. But the idea here is that how do you get your first 10, 100, 1,000 customers? So I want to move it from an abstract concept to like, what am I going to do this week to go get a customer? So for the first 10, it's going to be all about you, right? It's going to be hand-to-hand combat. It's going to be just work. When you get to 100, it's about we're hiring salespeople or we're doing marketing, depending on our go-to-market strategy. And to get to 1,000, it's going to be way more than you, right? Because as the founder and CEO, you have to figure out how you're going to delegate those tasks to get it done. So what I want to know at that scale is how do you go from the 10 to 100 to 1,000? What's your marketing spend? What channels are you going to spend money on? Are you doing trade shows? Are you doing Facebook ads? And keep in mind, at this point, the answer may be, Dave, I don't actually know yet. That's okay. I just want you to have a hypothesis. It can't be like, oh, I'm going to wait until I get into the program and then I'm going to figure it out. You won't get into the program. So you need to bring your hypothesis to the selection committee, what if you're wrong? You're wrong. Like, you're doing a startup, you're going to be wrong about lots of things. So don't worry about whether you're right or wrong. Worry about whether you have some conviction and a hypothesis that you think will work. So if you're the person who comes in and says, well, once we get in the program, we'll have money and we'll figure out how we're going to spend the $45,000. I want you to know how you're going to spend the $45,000 before you get to selection committee and pitch, because the companies who get in will actually have a hypothesis about it. So know that that's the position I want you to have going into the last day in selection committee. Okay. Your team slide. So you'll put up the photos of the, here are our key people on the team. If they have roles with companies with logos that you recognize, I'd put up those logos underneath the people. And then finally, do you have a clear ask? We want to get in this program because, so we need help getting access to mentors. We think Bahrain is a great market to get into GCC and MENA. Great. Whatever you think why you need access to the program, in addition to the 45,000, that's going to be in your slide. There's a blog post link there at the end that talks about, should it be 10 slides? Should it be 13 slides? The big thing here is that, again, if you have traction, you want to tease the traction in advance. Okay. Questions about your 10 slides? We're going to be building them out over the next 3 days. So you're going to spend time on each.
Dave, may I ask a question? Mm-hmm. Are we going to address the team formation during the boot camp? I'm referring to the advisors.
Yeah, so you can, I would say that it's secondary to the team who's actually the operating team. So advisors are interesting, but not necessarily as relevant, because advisors tend to be peripheral, right? So unless they're actually on the board, in which case it's okay. For some of you, you may have some advisors who give you access to market or really knowledge about particular markets. That's good. I think they're worth mentioning, but it's secondary to the team who's actually doing the execution. So advisors are we'll talk more about advisor comp and stuff on that when we have a few minutes as we get to the end of the program. But generally speaking, advisors to me are something that are people who are not doing the work. So as an investor, I tend to be underwhelmed by that. I'm like, oh, that's kind of curious, but they're not actually going to be doing the work.
Okay.
Other questions about the 10 slides? I'll make sure we post them as well in the summary stuff for the end of the day. So they'll be on the website. So for whoever asks.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So, and then let me pull up. Go ahead.
What type of slides samples, supporting slide samples and use?
Yeah, so supporting slides may be your financial model. It could be market research. It could be patents. It could be a breakdown of your competitive analysis. So think of it as the common, one of the things you'll see as a trend is when you get done with your slide pitch, people will consistently ask you the same question. So what you'll want to do is make sure that you're answering those questions preemptively in the slides. So I'm just putting a link up here to everybody as well for both the slides and today's presentation slides are up there just in case you need access to that again. So yeah, supporting slides could be your advisory team, advisory board members might be on a supporting slide, your competitive pricing analysis detail, your intellectual property and patents may be a detail. So whatever questions you think, gosh, I wish I had more time to spend on the pitch, but you have 5 minutes. And for some of you, you're like, I'll never get this into 5 minutes. You will, like you'll get it down, right? But the thing that you want to talk the most about will be one of those things that, like market sizing we'll talk about today in your total addressable market. You're going to spend more time on that topic and the research on these topics than you actually spend on the slide deck, right? So you're going to spend a whole bunch of time going like, here's our market, here's our sizing. You'll probably spend less than 30 seconds explaining that on the slide deck. Now, some of you will spend way too much time. You're like, but I spent so much time doing all this research. I need to spend more time explaining it. No, you don't. Like the best you get on this slide is the investors give you a head nod and you move on. That's it. Right. So in your, but all the time I've spent, Dave, doing this research, I really want to tell them about it. No, like you want them to go like, sounds about right. So your market slide is going to recognize that the total addressable market for what we're doing in MENA or GCC or Bahrain is X tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions or $1 billion. And we just want to know that the numbers are generally, they look okay. Like if you say it's like $16 trillion, I'm going to be like, no, it's not. Or we're going after $1 billion markets. I'm like, no, it's not. Like you don't have enough money to do that, right? So the best scenario you get is the investors look at it and say like, sounds about right, right? Or they disagree with you completely, in which case you've hurt your slides going forward. So it's just an example of where you spend more time preparing than you actually spend talking about it on the slide deck. But you still need to do the work in the background so you have the work done. Okay. Other questions about the 10 slides before we move on?
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically my question is, should we add testimonials from like known people? For example, our idea is based on innovation. It's converting sign language to voice and voice to sign language. And we have a very specific market for that. So should we add testimonials? For example, AWS supported us a lot in creating MVP. Also, Tamkeen and Ministry of Information Affairs. So all this stuff and people from them, from there, should we add testimonials for them, from them?
I think it's okay to have things like that in as quotes on some of the slides. Just don't read them to me, right? Because as you're going through your narrative, so a general rule of thumb or best practice is the slides serve you as a prompt to tell your story. But I can read the slides faster than you can read them to me. So I want them to serve the function of tell me a story arc. And what I mean by that is every good story starts with, in your guys' case, starts with the customer, right? So I want you to tell me that story, but as you tell me the story, you can add quotes from your customers if you have them, but don't read me the quotes, right? Because it'll break up the storyline and the story you're trying to tell. So, and we'll talk more about story arcs as we get, right now we're worried about getting the right pieces in the 10 slides. But in the ideal scenario, for example, I would talk about my team as, our team's the right team to do it because of this. Because, Salah has 10 years of experience building technologies for this type of thing, or so-and-so has already built this type of product for this particular market. So ideally, I'm telling, it's not just the slide standing alone as chunks, it flows together. But right now I want to start off by, do I get the right 10 slides first? So if you have testimonials, put them in or put them as supporting slides at the end. Here's what some of our biggest customers have said, and you can have that slide up at the very end and people can read it as they're asking questions. Is that helpful?
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Other questions before we move on?
Yeah, I have one little question.
Yeah, right.
Emna, go ahead.
It's about the breakdown of each slide. So we noticed that when we say a hook in the beginning and then the problem and solution, that takes much of the presentation from the time that we could talk about our traction or the market size or the team. So is it a fixed number per slide, a fixed number of session per slide, or what do we focus on the most? Is it okay to focus on the problem and solution, or do investors want just a tease and then know the rest?
Great question. So I think the big thing here is you need to give them enough so that they give you a head nod, like, I may not understand your market, but I understand where you're going with it. So now I want to move on. So as an investor, what I want to know is that you're the right team to actually solve the problem, which is kind of slide 8, right? So there's no like 30 seconds per slide rule or anything like that. It's more around how do you tell the story. But in telling the story, you have to check all of the boxes. So for example, if you leave off competitive analysis, you'll get asked about it, but you may not get to tell your full story as well. So you just have to be careful that you're timing it enough that you don't get end up spending 3.5 of the 5 minutes just on problem solution. Like, I really want to see product, right? So if you have product, I want to see it. If you have concept, right, you're not going to show me screenshots of the product, but ideally I'd like to be able to see both, right? So yeah, pacing is always a challenge for sure. Abdullah? You're on mute.
Hi, Dave.
Hey.
I was asking whether you need to mention the competitors or your competitor's name when presenting. Like, say Google does this, is it advisable?
Yeah, I think, well, again, I think it's one of those that comes into the, if your competitive analysis comes out that these are the big competitors in the space, then you need to be able to address how you will have competitive advantage compared to those big players, right? Or if they're in a market that's adjacent to yours, or they're not doing something, or you're doing something differently. What I'm after with that is why are you going to win, right? So in your competitive analysis slide, you may have the names of the direct competitors, the indirect competitors, maybe adjacent market competitors. But the story you're trying to tell there is why can you win in that market compared to those folks? So where it makes sense, having names is fine, right? Because if I'm going to invest in you, I'm going to go do the market research, and which is our next topic, and I'm going to go find out who's already raised money, what their competitive advantage is, what their product is like. So you don't need to hide it from me. I'd say make it available, and it also lets the investor know that you know who your competitors are.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi. So I said like we can't say like that the market value is, for example, 1.2 billion. We said like it's not. So I want to ask, like, do you connect the market value to the assumption that we're big, but necessarily that that we're going to take over all of it, if it makes sense?
Yep. Yeah. And we'll talk about that here, market sizing after lunch. So I'll defer that question until after lunch, because I'll give you the way to think about, because again, the exercise here in market is there's this top-down exercise of how big is the market total, starting with Bahrain, going to GCC, going to MENA, going to global. And then what percentage of it do you think you can actually get to, which is more bottoms up, which starts with how do I get to 10 customers, 100 customers, 1,000 customers? So the exercise is actually doing both. So you're doing the big picture top down, but your go-to-market actually connects the dots into what your launch market is, or what I call your launch addressable market, which kind of connects those two pieces together. But we'll talk about that after lunch.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah. Other questions? All right. So let's head off to research and competitive analysis. So these two topics are going to be topics that you're going to spend a lot of time on doing your research and doing your competitive analysis. And then the challenge becomes when you pitch them, you're going to go through it in like 30 seconds, right? So there's a disproportionate amount of work compared to the amount of time you're actually going to spend pitching it. So just know that in advance. All right. So research, what's good research? How do you go do it? So I'm gonna give you some practical advice and some hacks that'll help you get this done faster and get it done in such a way that when you present it on the slides, it'll be credible. So first off, recognize you're not the customer. I hope that you have vertical market subject matter expertise. I hope have great experience in that. But what I'm after with this one is, this research has to be not just about what research you did. It has to be about, or not just about you, but the research you've actually done with the customer. So that's first and foremost. Though you may be a subject matter expert, you're not the customer. So there's a number of methods of research, and I'll make sure that I've listed some books. For example, Blue Ocean is a great book on market research. Gartner's 4-quadrant or Magic Quadrants is a great example of how to outline your research. The methodology to me is less important than what you go do that's practical. So I'm going to give you some kind of hacks to figure this out. And if you're super geeky about research, there's lots of good methodologies out there and lots of things you can actually get to that's accessible for you from a market research perspective. typically with research companies like Gartner or Forrester, if they've written a research report already about your market, it's probably too late for an early stage startup. So what I mean by that is that if big companies are paying to get reports around your particular market, then there's already big companies that are competitors in that market. So just know that it's interesting data, but may not be as useful as going out and sourcing the data yourself. Some of you will have a challenge finding raw data on this because you're doing something that's pretty new. And if you're doing something that's new, then you're going to have to use kind of triangulate the data to actually figure out how to find the data and source the data yourself. So start from your process goes, start with Google search and think about it in terms of what are the keywords or phrases your customers are typing into the search bar, and use that as a starting point. That'll start you down the process, and I'll work you through the mechanics of how to track that. You can also use Crunchbase. Crunchbase will give you, there's both a free and a paid version of Crunchbase. And I'll list one of the other resources here in your guys' regions here in a bit. But Crunchbase will give you, of the companies out there that are competitors, how much money have they raised, when did they raise money, and who did they raise money from? So from a competitive standpoint, you can begin to find, if I'm searching the keywords that my customer is searching for, if somebody's advertising in that, I'll see the advertisements first. I'll also see the organic search results. I can use that to start to build out my list of competitors. And then I'm going to begin to look at competitive pricing and what their services are. So practically speaking, you're going to do a Google Sheet and a Google Doc. The Google Doc narrative will begin to kind of outline where you found different resources. The Google Sheet will begin to track the competitors. And one of the things I've done in the past as both a founder as an investor is I'll share that research with my investor if it helps them write their investment memo faster. So not for getting into this program, but for later stage. Anytime I can help my investor do the process faster, it's definitely appreciated. So you're going to begin to build out that both Google Sheet and Google Doc that tracks the narrative. And the reason you want to do that is because it's hard to go back and like, I saw this great research report, where did I see it? So I would encourage you to, when you find those pieces of research, you're going to throw those into your the Google Doc as a note. And the notes will be pretty unstructured, where the Google Sheet will have a list of all of your competitors listed, and then links to additional resources I'll walk you through here in a minute. Why is that important? Investors tend to look at it as what's called pattern matching. So this is a copy of the Crunchbase website. You'll see here that they have organization name, category, headquarters location. There'll also be stage. So stage is pre-product, pre-revenue, early revenue, Series A, right? So stage has to do with what stage the company is in, because investors will tend to look at it and say, oh, are they early stage? Are they pre-revenue? And where do I invest as an investor? So some big investors only invest in late stage. Some will look at the geography of the company. So are they based in MENA? Are they based in London? And then what's the categories? So am I in hardware, software, consumer, consumer packaged goods? So that pattern matching is what you're going to start to see emerge as you start to do the research of how do these companies quantify themselves? How do they talk about themselves? So with that Google Sheet, so you can do one tab for research, one tab for competitors, and you're going to do another tab for keywords. So the third tab will be a keyword tab. So who's written about your market? So one of the things I'm after here is who are the bloggers, the professionals, the researchers who are writing about your particular vertical market. So, and I'm going to put all of those names into one of the tabs. So for example, I want to know if there's a thought leader who's writing blogs about your particular market. Who is that person and what are they writing about? So I can start to build out a profile of who the thought leaders are. Who's raised capital in this market already? So for example, one of you are talking about competitors in the West. How much capital have they raised? When did they raise the capital? Have they launched into any other international markets yet? Are they in Brazil? Are they in the US? Are they in Europe? So that, because they'll go to big markets in kind of descending order. So I want to know who's in what market already. And then what's the state of the wave? We talked about before the break. Is the wave already crashed? Is the wave still out there in the future? Right? We're talking about the taboo of mental health. Technically, I'd look at that wave and go like, the wave is still out there, like it's going to come to shore. The question is, when? And do I have a story that tells that says, hey, we can survive until the wave gets to shore? So what I'm looking for here in the initial set of review of competitors is what's the state of the market? So is there 4 or 5 competitors who've already raised money? How much money do they raise? Are there competitors in MENA? Somebody coming out of Riyadh, right, who's already raised $5 million, right? So what I want to know here is what's the overall state of the market? So your research slide is going to look kind of like this. You have the competitor name. The URL could be as part of the competitor in that particular cell. You're going to do a Crunchbase link. So I'm going to look at how much money they've raised, from who, how many people do they have for employees. If there's any revenue data, I'm going to find the revenue data on Crunchbase as well. Who are the key team members? What are their features? And I'm going to have a column for notes. So with that, what I'm looking at is what was their initial product, or what's their product today, and what was their product historically. And we'll talk about how we can go back and do that in a minute as well. So that's going to be the start of how the sheet comes together. And basically it just gives you a place to track all of the data. And again, the Google Doc version is just a narrative version where you can copy and paste what were the interesting articles I found. Once you spend a few hours on this topic, you'll realize why you kept it in notes as well. And it'll be super unstructured, but you're going to be like, oh, I forgot that particular post, or the person who wrote that blog, or where that data was about the size of the market. So I just want you to get it all in one document. Okay. All right. So specific competitors, what I want to dig into there is what are their specific feature list? Like what are the features they're listing, and why are they listing them? So typically these folks have spent more money on marketing than you have, almost always the case. So I want to learn from their experience. So how are they positioning the product? Are they positioning it? What's the voice they're using to talk about the product? Where do I think there's gaps in the market? Is it not in Arabic? Is it not in currencies? Is it not culturally relevant? Like look for where there's opportunities and gaps in the market. I'm going to look at their pricing. With their pricing, it's going to be both the current pricing and packaging. It could be their tiers of prices. So they're tiering per users, they're tiering per incidents. Like how are they pricing based on that data? And then I'm going to look at who their target customer profile is. Some companies will list logos. So you'll be able to look at the competitive sites and see that they have logos of their companies or their competitors, logos of their customers, and start to look at why those customers are the customer profiles. And then from a marketing approach standpoint, are they doing retargeting ads? So if you visit their site once, are you seeing their ads show up on the internet? So that's retargeting. So are they doing Google AdWords spend? So if you type in the keywords and phrases, are they showing up on Google ad spend? Are they doing Facebook ads or Instagram ads? So I'm looking for what I can learn about their marketing approach, what I can learn about their product positioning, and what I can learn about their pricing by digging into their pages. Okay. So that's a very top line view. So a few hacks to get you there faster. So a couple things. One, you can do a right mouse click on the page. A right mouse click on the page will give you access. You can say, click on view source. View source will let you see their meta description or their meta tags, which is the data that Google sees that consumers don't see. So for example, what keywords and phrases are they using on their page? I can go into Google, then go into the Google Sheet, drop in the keywords and phrases. I can then take that URL from that competitor and go to the Google Ad Manager tool, type in that URL, and it will show me every keyword. If they're buying Google AdWords, it'll show me all of their keywords that they're indexing for. I can copy and download that in an Excel spreadsheet, and I'll have a list of all their keywords and phrases. Now, Google won't tell you what they're paying for those ads, but Google will show you the traffic volume of those ads. So keep in mind, Google always makes money, right? So if you decide you want to do Google Ads, just know that you need to figure out the mechanics of Google Ads before you do it, because you can burn through a lot of cash on Google Ads before you're ready. So I'm not suggesting you do Google Ads yet. I'm suggesting you use that tool to find out what your competitors are using to describe their product and what keywords they're using to find customers. So you can use that. So Google Ads will give you access. So you put in that URL and they'll tell you all the keywords that they're buying. You can use SEMrush. So SEMrush will tell you what volume of traffic is available on those keywords. And Topic Explorer will allow you to type in a topic and then see what the actual volume and who the big competitors are for those particular keywords and trends. So, so if you have for example, if you took Basma's, you're around mental health, you can see within the region who gets the most traffic around those particular topics. So again, topics are fairly high level and generic. Keywords and key phrases are the ones you want to capture and drop into your Google spreadsheet, so that you don't have to go do that work again later. So think of this as just being able to do the work once instead of having to do it over and over again. If you want to track what they're doing on social media from a trend perspective, you can use a product called Rival IQ. It's a company based here in Seattle, actually, that will allow you to track what the company's doing on social. If you're geeky about it, there's a tool called an RSS reader. And RSS reader is kind of an old tool in tech now. A company called FeedBurner actually invented it, and Google bought FeedBurner, but you can actually subscribe to what's happening on that particular page. And anytime that page changes, for example, pricing, anytime that page changes, you'll get notified of that page change. So did they change their positioning? Did they change their advertising? Did they change their pricing? You can actually use an RSS reader to track that down to a specific page within their site. Another thing you should be planning on doing is doing Google Alerts on all of your competitors. So anytime they hit the news, you'll get an email dropped into your inbox around what the competitor is doing. So it could be a press release, could be a product change, could be a new customer announcement, whatever it is, Google will drop that into your inbox using a Google Alert. So just go to Google, type in Google Alerts, you'll find it there. So there's some tools you can use to get that information. Why do you need that? So if you go to do your go-to-market plan, one of the things you're going to have to look at is what are the keywords and phrases that customers are looking for that will drive traffic to your site. If you've already copied those keywords from your big competitors, it'll just give you a good starting point. You won't have to go do it again. And it's a pretty simple download. So questions about this for getting the data or doing the research?
Yes, David, when I go to the source page of the website, when I go to the source page of a particular website of a competitor, how do you look for the keywords? Because I went to a website called everledger.com. I went to the source, but I could not. The data is too much.
So one thing you can do is hit Control F and type in keywords for Control Find. So let me give you a couple examples here. I'm going to change my screen share here, and I'll walk you through some of it here real quick. Hold on. All right. You see my built with screen? Yep. All right. So with built with, what's your competitor, Mohammed, you were mentioning?
Everledger.com.
EVERLEDG.
Yeah, Ledger. Yeah.
Okay.
.com.
All right. So Built With will show you all the technologies that the product is currently using. So for example, they're using Amazon usage statistics and they're using Route 53.
I think it's a different website.
What's that?
Let me just type it in the chat.
Oh, got it. They got the name wrong.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, hold on. Let me find it.
It's in the chat now.
Oh, there it is. Got it. .io. All right. So here are all the tools they're currently using on their site. So the company's built on with HubSpot. They're using HubSpot Analytics. They have Google Analytics plugged in and Google Tag Manager. They have font API. So this basically gives you all of the tech stack your competitors built on.
Okay, excellent.
So this gives you a chance to know, like, from a best practice standpoint, especially if you're doing a copycat of somebody. I would encourage you to think about trying to map to what they're doing. You know, if it's an old Ruby on Rails site versus a, more current technologies, try to map to what their most current technologies are. If I go to the straight site and hit the view page source, I can do a Command F for keywords. 3,600. So let's see what we usually keywords and metadata. Let's do metadata here real quick. I've got keyword there. Huh. View source. So usually Command F will get you to their metadata and their keyword info, and it's usually built really close to the header. So it shouldn't be something you have to, page unresponsive. So it shouldn't be something you have to spend a lot of time scrolling down through. It should be fairly close to the head. So the reason I bring that up is with Google is looking for the keywords and phrases that are most typically used that help them get indexed high. So it should be fairly close to the top of the header, but you should be able to find it that way.
All
So
right.
what's the theme, Mohammed, for that? What do they do? What do you guys do?
They provide a solution for tracking the source of diamonds.
Okay.
We plan to do the same thing for pearls.
So you see here, I can put in, obviously I was in the US from that profile, but you can put in a theme and the topic to, this is topic SEO monitor. And then it goes out and looks at the particular topic and will tell me who gets the most traffic around that particular topic. Usually it's not this slow.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry, while it's loading.
Yeah, go for it.
In terms of organizing the information or the results, you obviously want to take the butter out of it all and put it in your presentation.
Yep.
I'm interested in examples when it comes to that, just while it's loading.
Yeah, so usually the competitive slide will end up looking like a 4-quadrant box with an X and Y axis, where you outline what your competitors, who's in the top right quadrant, if you will. So that's one way to approach it. The other thing you can approach your competitive, it could be a list of all of your competitors with a list of features and how your feature is different. So those are the two most common ways that the slide is going to work. This is more of the what's behind the slide, obviously. Like you have to go do the research to know who's there. But the way it will kind of manifest itself in your 10-slide deck will be to be a 4-quadrant box where there's, you're obviously positioned in the top right is the right place to be, or you'll have a stack of here's our competitors and here's our features. But I would put your feature list in the front and not all the way over at the end, just because it's what the investors are looking for is how does your thing compare to everybody else's thing, right? So and then back, Mohammed, to your question, here's the current trends within the US Google data. Here's where most of the competitor traffic goes. You can search by search volume, year-on-year growth, cost per click, keywords and variations. So this is basically going to give you a jump start on looking for the data and knowing what data most people are actually finding. So that'll give you a way to start to look for what are the trends, where's the traffic coming. Blue Nile was started by a friend of mine, which is hysterical. So overall growth, 23%, cost per click, $2.30. So, and obviously it ranges a great deal based on what the cost per click is. So that just gives you an idea of where you can go to look for some of the data and some hacks to get to the data that's actually behind it. If you're B2C, let me give you some same things on the B2C side. So one of the things I would encourage you to do on B2C is to go, for example, to the Google Play Store or to the Apple App Store. Look for the ratings, 1 stars and 4 stars. One of the things I'd encourage you to look for is where are the extremes, right? Where are people like, oh my gosh, this feature is amazing, or oh my gosh, this is horrible. Don't look for the middle stuff, right? Look for what the extremes are, because it'll give you a good idea of where the gaps are in the market that customers want to be filled. So you can go look at that from a way to find data from the App Store if you're B2C. So obviously just B2C, it doesn't work in B2B. You might find something there if they have an app, but generally speaking, that's not the trend. Who's tried this before? So you can look at analyst reports. You can look at where companies failed. There's a Deadpool report from Crunchbase. I'll change my share here real quick. The Wayback Machine is the Internet Archive. So you can now go back to, from a pricing perspective and a positioning perspective. Let's see if it kept it in there. Here's your everledger.io. So they've been around since 2015. They started to get some significant traffic in 2018. I can click on 2018. This shows me cached pages of their historic website. So I can click on June, see there's multiple cached pages.
Hi, sorry, Dave.
Yeah.
We're not able to see the screen that I believe you're sharing.
Hold on just a sec.
The one where we can see the cache pages.
Yep. All right. Can you see the web archive now?
No.
Not yet. No.
All righty. Hold on. This usually isn't that hard.
Your screen is shared.
Too many screens up. How about now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
All right. Let me pull some things over. Okay. So Mohammed, this is the Everledger page from June 2nd, 2018. I see here they have no info about pricing. Has the page changed very much, or is this pretty much the same page they have today?
Well, they don't mention anything on the pricing. They ask you to book a demo.
Got it. So, so let me go back here. So one of the things I'd encourage you to look at as you look at these competitors historically is how has their product positioning changed and what's changed on their pricing. So for example, tiering. We'll talk more about pricing in a couple of days, but one way to go get the historic data is you can go back to, here's the 2021 data. Here's the number of cache pages from that day. And this may be not a site that doesn't change frequently or very frequently, but there's a lot of competitors where you can go back now. So you see they've moved the sign up, book a product demo is now front and center. Their headers changed completely. And so a lot has changed in the product positioning, but you can go back and forward and look at how their product position has changed. One of the things that's interesting to find is you'll see in some cases, some of the competitors started B2B and now they're B2C. And you're like, wow, I never would have guessed it, right? So just know that as you go back and look at these different competitive analysis, it'll give you a chance to see how they've changed over time. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let me go back to slides here real quick. Okay. So from a competition perspective, gives you a place to go look. From a tech stack perspective, you can look at Mixpanel. These are just, again, some tools very much like Built With. So I'm looking for what's the technology stack? What are they using for marketing? So for example, HubSpot's the way that they're tracking all their customer relationship management software, or Salesforce. So Ghostery allows you to check their marketing technology stack. So all of these are just tools that'll kind of help you get create the hacks around what they're using, and goes back to then the Google Analytics data, Google keyword data, allows you to start to build out the keywords and phrases that you think the customers are going to use to find you. Okay. So it'll give you some competitive analysis on both technologies and marketing. So from an updates perspective, I mentioned subscribing to Google Alerts. The RSS reader I mentioned as well. What you're after too is from a thought leader perspective is I really want you to start to build out a list of people who are thinking about your product in your particular market. So one thing that to be aware of is you can actually comment on their blog posts, whether it's a journalist or a blogger or somebody who's out and being a thought leader. So today I get probably, if I don't write anything on my blog, I get 3,000 readers a month. If I write, once a week, I'll get 5,000 readers a month. Any guess on how many people comment on my blog every month? Any guess?
500,000.
That'd be great.
500.
So actually it's about 3. So if somebody comments on my blog twice in 2 months, do you think I know who they are? Absolutely. Like they're a super fan, right? But I get 3,000 to 5,000 readers every month. I have no idea what they feel about it, but there's 3,000 to 5,000 readers. So if you find somebody who is actually writing topics about things that you care about and you comment on their blog post, but comment not selling your product, right? Comment adding value to their life. Like, hey, I found this other resource. Did you know about? Or, hey, have you seen this particular thing? Or how would you think about this particular problem? So I'll give you an example of, there's a guy named Tomas Tungus who works for Redpoint Ventures. He's a former Google guy. He writes about SaaS products and conversion metrics and growth, much more mature companies than I typically follow, where I tend to be super early stage. He tends to be super late stage. So he writes some great blog posts. So I had commented on a couple of his blogs. Then I saw that we were both speaking at the same conference in Vancouver, Canada. So I reached out to him and said, hey, I see you're going to be at the same conference. We should get together and grab a drink. And it's because I had commented on his blog 3 times. That was it. I totally just fanboyed him, right? Nothing else. He's like, yeah, we should totally meet, right? But I bring that up because you can build relationships, but you have to do it based on adding value to them, not on just like, hey, let me sell you my product. So one of the marketing things we'll talk about tomorrow is PR. The challenge of PR is you have to have a story worth telling, not just a product worth selling, right? So you can't just be like, hey, write a story about me. That's not an interesting story, right? It's the question of how is your customer's life better now with your product? Or, how are you going to change the world because of your product? So help give me a story that's actually interesting to share and interesting to tell, right? But it's not a question of like product first. It's a question of like, hey, here's this information. Have you thought about this, right? So know that PR is great when you have a story to tell, but the story starts with your customer. It doesn't start with you. And
Dave,
then,
if I may share something
yeah,
that I use all the time, I write to the editors of business magazines commenting on the articles within the magazines, and usually I get a very good response. So as you said, we can develop relationships by reaching out.
yeah, and I'll ask questions. Like there's a fairly new media company in the US called Axios. And the Axios team is really interesting. They created this group of journalists who would all come from different places, and it's a virtual team. And I was noticing that in their advertising, they were taking Facebook advertising money, but they were being critical of Facebook in the editorial. So I just hit respond, and actually the editor-in-chief responded back to me, right? But it's, when I think about it, it's super consistent, right? So 3,000 people read my blog every month, but I hear from 3. So, if you actually ask the question, you're probably going to get an answer. So as you build out your list in that spreadsheet, I want to track what those, if they have a newsletter, I want to subscribe to it. RSS feeders aren't hard to set up, but they're definitely a little more tech oriented. But you can either, something that's easy, RSS feeder or feed burner is something you can use. But what I'm after is if my competitors are changing their positioning, or if my competitors are changing their pricing, I just want to know. And I want to know before my investors know, right? So what is it I want to track? As you build out your keywords and key phrases, you know that those are going to be the keywords and phrases that your customers are going to search for. So one of the things we'll talk about tomorrow is search engine optimization. SEO is great. It just takes a long time to build. So when you think about SEO, the thing I would encourage you to think about, and this goes into marketing, we'll talk about tomorrow, is what's the keywords in that phrase that your customer is typing in is going to be the headline of a blog post. If you want to index high on Google, so the good news is in Arabic in region, you can probably index about twice or 3 times faster than I can in the US, just because there's that much more competition and traffic. So search engine optimization and paid search use the same concept around what my headline is. In paid search, my headline is going to have a call to action, and it's going to send you to a URL. But I have limited text copy I can use. In search engine optimization, I have the opposite. In order for Google to index a particular topic, it has to be between 600 and 800 words or more. If it's less than 600 words, Google will look at it as trying to drive traffic without any value. And what Google's really after is sending customers to traffic that's useful. So let me give you a hack to do that. So one of the things that I've done consistently is I find people who are thought leaders, we mentioned them before, and I'll ask them if they'll do a Zoom interview with me. I will send them 4 questions in advance. It'll be about 30 minutes. During that call, we're going to do a dialogue like you would in any interview. I will then take that interview and recording, and I will send it to Fiverr. So Fiverr. If you don't use Fiverr yet, I would encourage you to look at it. I will have that transcription done for about $20. So I can literally do 3 interviews a week for $60 and post those interviews. So Google will then rank my site higher because the frequency of posting. My average post will be greater than 600 words. The headline is going to be the headlines I think is going to be the most searched key phrases by my customers. And now I have 20 or 30 blog posts in 3 or 4 months that allow Google to start indexing my site higher than competitors outside of the region. So think of it again, your hierarchy here is pretty straightforward. The headline are the keywords or phrases your customer is typing into. The first paragraph is a summary of the discussion you had with Dave. Then it's gonna read like an interview, because it is an interview. So you're not trying to make it a white paper or finished copy, right? You're just trying to give Google enough content to index on your behalf. So the great part is, in your topic in Arabic may be super not well covered, which means all of a sudden you'll be indexing crazy high compared to other international topics. So it's just a hack to help you get it together faster. If your company is a company that will benefit by search engine optimization, you need to start now, because it will take you a year. So give you an example, it's a super goofy one. So my number one blog post these days is startup board compensation. So I was doing an event like this with more mature companies. And the topic came up of like, how do we pay board members? And I'm like, that's a great question. I should write a blog post about it. So I went and did all the research, put all my notes together, wrote a blog post about it. And now I think it's probably number one on Google. Let's see. Startup board compensation. So there is, yep, it's the number one article. So, so it beat out tech. So it's been number two for the last 2 months behind the TechCrunch article, but it's now number one. So the point of it is the headline is the question that the customer is asking. The context of itself has to be between over 600 words, and the summary in the first paragraph needs to be a good solid summary that has your keywords included. So didn't think that was going to be such a big hit, but hey, who knew? So, but the same is true for you all in your particular topic. So this will also serve the function to help you with both your tagline and your value proposition, because the traffic that comes in, then you'll be able to track using Google Analytics, which is something we'll talk about setting up tomorrow. But Google Analytics will show you what traffic is coming in from your site and why. So somebody asked you to post that content on your website. So yes, so one of the things I do on the website is I would create a blog section. Some pieces will be posts like the blog. Some of the content will be pages. So for example, pricing or features or benefits will be feature pages, but these particular types of content will be listed in your blog post pages. And what you're after with your blog posts is to create, 5 a month or 10 a month that can then index around particular topics. So, and then the more, if you only have 5 pages on your website, Google will not index your page super high. If you have 50 pages on your website, Google will index your page pretty high. So that's just, it's simple mechanical stuff, and it will take you a year to build. But if you do it systematically and do the interview method, it'll be pretty light lift. Questions about some of these hacks before we move on? All right, so one question I always get asked and want to address is, what do you do when you don't find any data? So this is always a hard challenge, because some of you are going after markets that aren't well covered by analysts, or people haven't spent a bunch of money and you're doing something very new. So the way you go about that is looking for adjacent market data. So we're like the this for that. We're the Uber of whatever, right? So what I'm looking for is, where has there been other market research done that I can draw on, that I can draw as a parallel? So for example, if I can find a pitch deck from somebody in the West, then I want to use that data to say, well, in the West, they view the size of the market. Uber's original target market was $4 billion. MENA is this percentage of the US market. So we could draw a parallel that it says it's this percentage of this particular market. Again, keep in mind, your good slide on your competitive analysis is simply a question of like, yeah, it sounds about right, right? And what you're after here is that you need to answer that you know who the competitors are, but you don't want to spend too much time giving them tons of credit. At the same time, if you find that there's lots of competitors and you didn't know who they were, or you discovered new ones as you go, you have to ask yourself the hard question of like, is there still room in this market? So I was working with a founder who went through Techstars recently, and she's working on a new idea. And it's funny, it's gotten down to where it's a text dialogue. She's like, do you think the market still has opportunities? There's one competitor that's fairly large. They've raised $14 million, right? And the question was, how much do we know about their revenue, right? Do you think you can compete with one company who's raised $14 million? One company's pretty easy competitor. $14 million, not a lot of money raised, but not a small money raised either. So what she was after was, how do I get more data? So in her case, she's going after HR data. So we looked at it and said, how many companies are in this target customer segment, which gets us more into market. But I'm trying to find data from other competitors and triangulate on that data. So sometimes that's as good as it gets. So what should your, again, back to your slide, and we'll get to market and after lunch. But your slide for this is going to be a 4-quadrant box. You're going to list your other logos, right? It may be that they're not culturally relevant, or they're not in Arabic, or they're not in currency, or they're not in region. Great. That may be it. Or it could be that they service big companies and you're going after mid-market companies. Great. The XY axis has to not be weird, however, because I've seen some founders and it's like they've flipped the axis so that they're in the top right quadrant, but the definition of the axis is just a little off. So be careful that you don't do that. If that's not clear, then the thing I would do is I would outline your competitors. So you and your competitors, and for example, the check boxes are the features, right? We're going to do peer-to-peer simple comparison on these features, but they're not in Arabic and we are, right? So think of it in terms of, where do you think you have competitive advantage compared to your other competitors? Questions about what the slide will look like or where to get the data?
Dave,
yeah.
I have this question that I was asked by one of the potential customers that we will have in the future. And basically, he's a 6th generation pearl merchant. When I told him about the idea of using blockchain to track pearls, he said, do you think other players did not think about this? If they found it to be lucrative, they would not have left it to you. So how do you address such a question?
Yeah, the answer is, well, that one will always come up, right? Or somebody's tried this before and they died, right? And you're like, so timing matters a lot. So back to the why now timing question. And, you know, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, are a super interesting question around this one as well. So it really just is, I think you have to answer the question in context of, why is the timing right now where it wasn't before? At the same time, people who don't understand the technology, particularly on this particular one, is like, I don't even know that I'd bother asking that question, right? Because the answer is, you know, how do I know that this product is going to be is going to work on blockchain versus not work on blockchain? I don't think people understand it. One of the things you get frequently when you do these pitch decks, and when you ask customers questions, is you'll get a lot of people will nod and smile like they understand you when they really don't. Right. And human nature is such that no one wants to look dumb.
Yeah.
So if you ask investors questions and say, do you understand? Right. They'll nod and smile, but they don't understand. The problem is I have to be able to repeat it to my partners. And if I don't understand it, I just won't repeat it. Right. So the better approach is to say, hey, what a lot of people don't understand about this technology, or what a lot of people don't understand about this market, is this. So I can preemptively answer the question about competition before they ask it, or maybe they don't know how to ask the question about competition. So I would probably phrase it that way. Like, here's where blockchain really could be useful for this from a tracking perspective. Or what people don't understand about the technology because it's really early is these things. So I never want to take the assumption that my investor actually understands it, but I don't want to talk down to them either. Right. So I'll tend to take it in a more self-effacing, a little bit humbler perspective of like, hey, what some people don't know about my market is this. Now, keep in mind, for most of you, you have forgotten more about your market that you're going after and the competitors than I know as an investor, unless I really follow this market. or this vertical. Like there are verticals I know very well, right? E-commerce verticals, SaaS verticals, there's things that I know really well. But if you're doing something that's completely different, I'm gonna be like, that's very different, right? So you're educating as well as it's giving me the data about the analysis. So anybody still confused about where they'll get the competitive data, keyword data, any of those things? All right. Okay, last couple things here before we move on to our lunch break. Couple notes about bias. So one of the things I want you to realize is that we as founders believe the future as it's going to exist in the future. So if you go out and look for, the classic one is the CEO I mentioned earlier who raised money and is no longer CEO. He's like, our product is just better than their product. Now, he didn't have any customers, and the competitor he was talking about had a lot of customers. So there was just kind of this arrogance about like, our product's just better. Please don't be that person. Like that will not get you into the program and probably will keep you from getting funded, right? So you may believe that in your heart of hearts, and I totally respect that. What I want you to do is to come across as like, I'm out looking for data. So what I think you should have as a founder is you should have strong opinions, lightly held, and informed by data. Like I want you to have strong convictions, but if it's just your opinion with no data, then you're likely not to get funded. If it's your opinion that you've asked lots of questions by potential customers about, and somebody says, hey, I disagree with you, and you're like, well, I've talked to 57 customers and 48 of them said they would buy it, I'd be like, what? Tell me more. I will change my opinion as an investor. But if it's just your opinion and my opinion is going to win. So be careful about biases. And confirmation bias is one of the big ones that you'll get, because you'll go out and talk to customers and say, isn't this idea awesome? And the customer will go, oh, yeah, sure, right? Because they don't want to cause conflict, and they may or may not want to argue with you, or they may or may not understand what you're doing. So go out with the, hey, is this a problem for your life? And we'll talk more about customer development questions later in the afternoon. And I'm going to give you a list of the ultimate customer development question list as well that Mike Fishman did. And so that you can go out and actually gather data from the customers. But be careful, this is just a list of some of the biases. Be careful you don't bring your bias into this, because it will cost you years of time and potentially millions of dollars. So go out, look at your competitors for who they are, where they're strong at, where they're weak at, and try to be as objective as possible. That'll help inform your decisions about what product features you ship, when and why. Okay. All right. So last chance before we go into a break here. Do you know where you're going to get your competitive data? Do you have questions about that? Now's a good chance to ask, because you've got about an hour while you're working through lunch to go start doing your competitive analysis. What this will look like before it becomes a slide: Google spreadsheet, Google Sheet with a list of all the competitors, URLs, and Crunchbase URLs. It'll have a list of number of employees, amount of capital raised. If there's any data on revenue they're currently doing, you'll have that revenue data. You'll have another tab that has a list of their keywords and key phrases that you've pulled from the AdWords tool on Google Ads. So you're going to have another tab for thought leaders and bloggers and interesting articles. So now as I go through the process, I'm going to grab those and drop them into that tab. You'll have a notepad that you can use on a Google Doc. The Google Doc you're not going to share with anybody but yourself. It's just a way for you to follow the process of where I found the data and reference it back to the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is something you could share with an investor if they had questions. So, but the big ahas here is you should never walk away from a meeting where the investor says, oh, well, you're like so-and-so. that company in Riyadh that raised $10 million. You don't want that to happen, right? And the Wayback Machine will help you understand how they position the company historically and how they position their pricing. So for example, is it tiered pricing, unit-based pricing, and we'll talk more about pricing and revenue models tomorrow. So questions about where you're going to find your research before we head off to a break?
Dave, I have done the competitive analysis, and some of the competitors, we managed to find the total funding raised. Others, we couldn't. So do you have preferred websites to see the funding of these?
Yeah, in addition to Crunchbase, I know there's a couple that cover MENA. I have to look them up. I'll find them during the lunch break. I probably have them on a future slide. But if it's private data and you don't have the data, list them as competitors and know that they're there and they're viable, but they may be funded by privately and not in public data. That's fine. I think the big thing there is just to make sure that you list them out. And then question is just how do you compare to them from a feature benefit list? And by the way, being a low cost leader is not necessarily the competitive advantage slide piece that you really want to have. Like you may not be the cheapest, you may not have to be the cheapest one in market. So, but list them out, but just not the cash invested. Abdullah?
Hi, Dave. Just to add to that, for the local MENA ecosystem, Magnet is a great place to check out who's raising and how. Their newsletter is also brilliant. Yep. I mean, they literally send daily updates on, which startups have gotten funded, what the funding is like. It's a great motivation for founders fundraising, and also it's super informative. So that I hope that helps.
And well written, by the way. I agree with you. I get their update every day too.
Yes.
Sorry, what was that again? Could you?
Magnet. M-A-G-N-I-T-T.
I'll drop it in the chat.
Perfect.
Dave, I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
So, in terms of our idea, it's basically innovative, and I'm not finding a lot of competitors around that idea or that complete solution. So, is that something which is gonna hurt my business, or would you see it as a plus point?
It depends on how you explain it and where you talk about, as we go into after lunch, about the market size. So the question, when a VC hears somebody say, we have no competitors, that's always a detriment, right? So that it typically means there's no market. So what you have to prove to me is that there's no competitors yet because we're innovative and we're new and it's never been done before. Nascent markets are super interesting, right? So Airbnb was a nascent market, Uber was a nascent market. The question is it a big nascent market or is it just a new market? So we'll talk about market sizing after lunch, but the thought there is you really have to convince me that this market is really interesting and how you get to market is going to create competitive advantage for you, right?
Okay.
So that's going to be the critical piece. If you don't have long competition or a bunch of competition, then I have to believe that the market's not going to take 3 years to develop, because if it takes 3 years to develop, it's super expensive. Right. So the question is, can you get to market faster?
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Abdullah?
Yeah, Dave, we have launched in Nigeria. I don't know what we're supposed to use for the selection committee. Do we use our data here? Our platform is actually region agnostic and content agnostic and can be scaled to any region. It's not region based. So I don't know the research we are going to do now. Is it based on MENA, or we'll just use what we have been able to do here? I think that's coming from a position of strength. And we are Nigerians and do not have a lot of information about, the MENA region. I think we met one of the scouts when we went to Dubai. Mm-hmm. We were like nominated top startup to represent Nigeria at GITEX. So I don't know what's the best, data and market we should work on. Do we start, doing our research and start thinking of how to launch in Bahrain? Or, do we use the data that we have, the strength, the validations we have from the different aspects of our business. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll talk more about it after lunch as well. But I think the way to think about it is, given limited resources, which market do you think you can get to fastest, right? To show traction, because that traction will provide additional capital that can get you to the other markets that you can use the same scalable platform. So it really comes down to a go-to-market question, because you have a platform that could work in multiple markets. That's awesome. The question now is, how do you get market traction in which market first? And so that's a customer acquisition question, right? So is Bahrain the gateway for MENA for you? Could be. And that could be the application question of why you're applying for the program. Is we really want to get to the MENA region, and to get to Middle East and North Africa, we really need to do it through one of the GCC countries, and we think Bahrain is the best way to do it. Great. From a pitch standpoint, totally okay. From a practical standpoint, think of it this way. If I have $1,000 to spend a month in marketing, which country am I going to focus that spend? And part of the hypothesis is going to be based on what's my return on advertising spend for that effort. So if I spend $1,000 on MENA and I get $2,000 back in 35 days, versus I spend $1,000 in Nigeria and I get $4,000 back in 34 days, I'm going to double down on Nigeria every chance I get, right? But so the question of like, oh, it'll work everywhere, great. As a startup, as an investor, I'm like, it could work everywhere, but you have to be at scale to have it actually work everywhere. So the first thing I need to know is, how are you going to get from launch to scale? And that's going to be like, we're going to focus here and focus here and focus here. Great. Now, are you always going to be right? No, right? But you're making your best guess. But if you're like, we're going to focus on MENA because it gives us two things: access to capital through Flat6 and access to the GCC. Great. That's a believable story. Now you have to go prove it with actual data, right? And you're going to use the capital from the program to go actually prove it. Does that make sense? As kind of the narrative piece of how you put it together?
Yes, I think we got something. We'll discuss that over lunch.
Perfect. All right. Other questions as I send you off to your working lunch? All right. So I'm going to hit stop on the record. We're going to head off to lunch for 60 minutes, and I will see you back in an hour. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.